Hello. Let me get the frog out of my throat. My goodness. Hello, hello, hello. Clearly, I haven't had anything yet to drink today, and I haven't really spoken much today. So, yeah, let's do that. Hi, everybody. How you doing? Welcome to the morning tea with me, Amber Lalana, the crafty hippie witch. Today, we are crafting it up. Let me tell you. As you can see in the title, we are working on our whips. It is a crochet day because I am really needing to get some shit done. So I'm super excited. Please pay no attention to my bedhead that is trying to be covered up as well as possible. It is a lazy crafting day. It's going to be rainy here. So yeah, today's going to be crafty. Yay! So hello, hello, hello. How is everybody doing today? Welcome to the live. Welcome to the morning tea. Do you have your tea? Do you have your coffee? Do you have whatever it is you drink in the morning? Welcome. Welcome to the show. So what day is it today? I think today's Wednesday, isn't it? Happy hump day, everybody. Don't forget to mash your taters. So I've been working on some things. Lately. First of all, if you don't know already, I've been working on some Evil Eye granny squares. I think I showed these to you last time, and they're pretty awesome. I've got them nice and blocked now, so they're ready for projects. And I have 2 projects nearly complete. I just have to sew buttons on. And I've got a couple projects in mind for the rest of these, but I'm debating on how many of what I should do. So this, okay, is a seat belt cover. Right there. I just have to put the buttons on the back, and it'll be ready, and it'll go on the website. So these are going to be available. And then I made myself a sling bag. Okay, so these are perfect for little festival bags, little, it's summer, right? So we need little bags, little tote bags to bring our stuff around. If we're not going to carry a bunch of stuff, who wants to carry a bunch of stuff? This fits. I made sure that this was long enough because this is an iPhone. I don't know. It's one of the bigger ones. Okay, so it fits. I made it so that it actually fits the phone in there. Okay, so yay for that. This is called the Granny Square Sling. This is going to go on the site very soon. This one is mine. It's the prototype, but it's a little bit crooked. I got to do it a little bit better on the next one. But anyway, so basically any kind of granny square can go on here. So it can be any kind of theme. It can be a sunflower. It can be just a basic plant granny square, or whatever color thing or whatever like that. So I really like these, and I think these will be really cool. And I think they'll be a decent seller when it comes to the markets and things like that. I'm currently participating in a cheers glitter world. Hello, hello. That is cute. I like it too. Isn't it great? I just posted a picture of me wearing it on Facebook. I'm like, let me show it off. So I have a little thing here. Like I said, I still have to put buttons on. I got to put a little button here. So you got a little thing right there. I got to go get some buttons. I don't have the buttons that I thought I needed. All my buttons are small. I need big ones, larger buttons. Yeah, I don't have them. So currently, like I was saying, Witchcraft 101 is a group that I'm a part of on Facebook. And this week, they have a yearly enchanted market where they choose certain vendors to promote and post their wares and how you can order and things like that for 1 week a year on Witchcraft 101. Lots of people in that group. It's a wonderful group and lots of activity. So that's what I'm doing this week. And that's why I meant to get more ready for this. I meant to get more ready for this. But spring happened so fast. And I've been out in the yard doing lots of things. And then, I got lazy with some things and I didn't start making things as quickly as I should have because I'm a procrastinator. Aren't we all to some degree? So I procrastinated and I didn't make quite quite the amount of wares that I like new. I want to make new things, right? Anyway, I digress. I'm just rattling off now. So I'm a part of a Witchcraft 101 group, which is having a marketplace this week. And I was honored to be chosen to be one of the approved vendors. That's not something that like you take lightly. There's so many people out there that want to be a vendor for these types of things. There's so many people out there that do their own crafts and do their own artwork now and put it out there for to kind of make a living on, right? I'm not any different from any of those people. I just, my difference is that I'm not very good at marketing. So not very many people know about my shit. But anyway, so it's 3 days into this. Is the third day of the marketplace. And I just posted my hats because I make witchy hats and all kinds of different hats. As you can see back here, I have hats. This one's kind of a little off to the side there. I have hats and I make hats and I love hats. So we posted about hats today and I'm making new things. And my WIP today, my WIP is a tarot card holder. Okay. This is something I've been wanting and this is wanting to make for a while. And I hadn't gotten around to it until this week because I knew I want to have more products. I have a lot of different types of products and I don't have my witchy products are not as plentiful as I would like them. I'm all over the board when it comes to things, right? So I've created this lovely little tarot card holder. It's got some dangles on the bottom here. And you open it up, okay? You open it up like so. And here is a mat long enough for you to place your tarot cards when you read them. There's enough space for 3. And this is a typical size tarot card holder, okay? So you have your tarot cards in here. They fit right in here, okay? And you can have them boop, boop, boop. What does this one say? 3 of Swords. This is the first tarot card holder that I created. And this is your standard size. And I'll be taking pictures when I finish my other one today. I'll be taking pictures for the website. And yeah, I'm pretty freaking proud of it. So we have tarot card holders coming available soon. And then you put your tarot back in here when you're done. You bring it around. And then this lovely little thing right here is your little tie so that it's not flopping all over the place. So you bring it up. Oops. You bring it up and you just put a little tie. Boop. 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 It's so cute. Anyway, a tarot card holder, which is super awesome. And it's so cuddly and cozy. I'm digging it. I'm digging it. It's like, I like it. And this one, so we have regular size tarot cards, right? And then we have these. And then we have these that are clearly not that size. That's just like not. They're quite a bit larger. So we're making, and these are typically oracle cards. So we're making tarot card holders and we're making larger. Look at the difference. We're making larger oracle card holders, right? Thank you, glitter. I love it. So this is the color I chose for the oracle card holder. And this is what we're working on today. We are finishing this up today. It's just one big sheet right now, but it will fold into this with charms and whatnot. So this, let's see where I'm at right now. I've got, and I made this a little bit larger. I might have made this a little too large at the ends. We'll find out when I sew it together. but it needs to wrap once for the card, right? So we've got it wrapped once for the card, and then it needs to have the space for the other cards. So I'm almost done with the length, I think. I need about I need about one card more of width, and then I can go ahead and start finishing it off. So I'm super excited about this. This is going to be finished and put on the website today. Yes. Isn't purple, this purple especially, I love this, and I almost started doing it with this purple, like this beautiful, rich purple, but for some reason I stopped. And I'll probably make another one in that color, no big deal. But for some reason I stopped because the first one I wanted to make, I felt this lilac purple a little bit more. Like it just felt better for some reason to start off with. So yeah. So here, this is, I forgot what kind of stitch this is called. The pick stitch or pitch. I don't know. It's basically an alternation of a double crochet and a single crochet all in the same line. So that's what brings in this kind of like bobble. It's like a bobble thing. I like it though. I like the it's warm and it's like, there's not a lot of gaps going on. So I like the stitch a lot. I think it's pretty cool. So yeah, we're here today. You're hanging out with me, and all I'm really doing today is whipping it out, baby. I am going to hang out with you guys. If you're here, cool. If you're not, that's cool too. But we're gonna do this. We're gonna finish this tarot card holder, this oracle card holder with you today. So what I'm gonna do is set this up so that you can see it down here because I don't have a good camera. Like, I don't know. Can you see that okay? Actually, that might not be so bad, will it? I was going to put my camera in here, but I think that might work out well. Let's do that. I think you can see that okay, right? That's not that bad. That ain't that bad. I got to answer a message. Sorry. Hang on just 1 minute. Hi guys, hi. I'm just chilling over here answering a question. What is up, Rose? Roseland, how you doing, sweetheart? It's good to see you. I am looking for my hook. Hook. Hi. So I've got whips in progress. I've got things that I've been making all over the place. I'm in an online marketplace vending thing this whole week, so I'm trying to get stuff done, crafted, and in order for them. And what did I do with my hook? I lost my hook. Good afternoon, Annie. Hello, darling. I don't know where my hook is. Where did my hook go? I don't know. Did I put it in here? Shit. I always lose my things. Always lose my things. Fucking A. So this actually has already taken quite a bit. It's maybe a half roll. Well, excuse me, but I need to go search for my hook, which I think is in my lap. Well, that was fortunate. I didn't have to leave it all. Oh, Lord. I tell you what. Okay, let's put this back and start on our thing. So, what are some things that you guys like to do when you do like crafting stuff? So, generally, I tend to have background noise. I like background noise. Music, a TV show. Lately, I've been trying to get some books on tape. It's easy, right? Like you could just listen to the story. So I'm listening to this story on YouTube. It's a full book on tape on YouTube. You can find those on YouTube, by the way. I'm so proud of this right now. I know it's just real basic and stuff, but I'm fucking proud of it. So whatever. Anyway, what was I saying? Yeah, I forgot what I was saying. I forgot. Anyway. Oh yeah, books on tape. So I'm listening to this book on tape currently. And like I said, there's a lot of different books on tape that you can find, because a lot of times you have to buy the full book on wherever. You don't really get to see or find a lot of like full length audios for free, especially like on YouTube and stuff like that. I don't like paying for things. Just saying, like Audible or all those booky things. You gotta have like a membership. I don't like that. I don't like memberships. I don't like paying extra money every month for things. It's not fun. I need my money for other things like yarn and hooks and tea. Not to pay monthly for a book to read. So I can't very well crochet and read a book because I need my hands to work. So that doesn't work, right? So books on tape work for that. Or podcasts. That's something that I actually I have not really dug into, is podcasts. And I feel like I should. I feel like there's probably a lot of awesome podcasts out there, but I haven't tapped into that. I have not tapped into that world at all. At all. So currently, oh, I really need to fix my plant. It is leaning like a great tower of Pisa over there. Anyway, so I'm currently doing a book on tape. I'm fantasy ridden, like driven when it comes to books on tape. If it's not something that I'm going to learn, then it's something that I want to go into a whole nother world about. Elves, dwarves, knights, Lord of the Rings type shit, right? I want to dragons and whatever. I want to be in another world. I want adventure, right? That's the kind of books I love. So That's the kind of book I look for. And there's not a lot of them out there. There really is not a lot of them for free out there. You usually have to pay for these ones. But I did find there's a few channels on YouTube that actually do have a full, like, full audiobooks. It's not just like a teaser or whatever the case may be. Some of them go by chapter. That can get sometimes kind of annoying because then you have to start a new video after every chapter. And as easy as that might be for the actual person reading it, because then they could start a new, it's only one chapter they have to get through instead of the whole fucking book. I get it. I get it. I read, and I used to read, and I thought about doing a reading YouTube channel for a while there. Never got into it. I sort of started it, but then I didn't. How many times have you think that I think of things and then they flop? I think of things and then they flop. Like, I don't have the energy to keep going with things sometimes. They're great ideas, but evidently they're just not the idea that I was meant to flow with. That's fine. Whatever. What was I saying? Oh yeah. So I looked up, some good YouTube bookers, YouTube audio bookers, and I'm listening to this one currently. Oh, I gotta change. Hang on. I have to change my account so I'm in the right one. Okay, excuse me. Now I have to go through my history because I don't know the last time I actually listened to it. So this is a book, I forgot the name of it, but it's a book about a magical land that has been divided and was conquered, or no, it's kind of like a Sauron story, right? So like there's this entity, there's this guy, this evil guy who's like a Sauron. It's like kind of wizardy, and he was defeated. And then there was like magic barriers put up in different lands and stuff like that. Anyway, it's a really cool book. So there's all the wizards are gone. So this one person has to look and find this wizard, and the wizard has to find the seeker. And these three people are the one who are the basically the combination of who will destroy this evil entity who's trying to take over the world. And he's not an entity, he's a person, but he's magic and powerful. So that's the gist of the story. And right now I am at the point where the main character just found out that he's the seeker. And he's like, what? They also just found out that his best friend for his whole life, that was kind of like his father's best friend, was actually the wizard that has been missing for like 20 some odd years. And this new chickie, who is also the main character of the story, is a super, super magic being that evidently she's keeping a secret from the rest of them. Not the wizard, because the wizard knows what she is, but the main character, and they like each other, but she can't be with them. And he doesn't know why yet, because he doesn't know what she is, and she hasn't told him yet. And she's like the great, I forget what they call her now, but anyway, it's a really fun book. It's a really like fantasy adventure book. And now they're trying to, so their goal now is they have to get across the magical barrier without going through the magical barrier, because the magical barrier involves the underworld and, like where people are dead. And the evil guy knows that they're going to pass through. So the second that they pass through that barrier, they're going to be caught. And that there goes the end of it all. So the seeker, who is the seeker of things, right? He seeks truth. He seeks things. He seeks things out in a good way, like he is a good-hearted seeker. He seeks the answers to things. So his job right now is to seek a way to get through the barrier, through it, without going into it. And so yeah, I'm on, oh, there it's called Wizard's First Rule, Sword of Truth, #1, Terry Goodkind audiobook. Terry Goodkind, that's why I chose this, because Terry Goodkind is actually a fantastic author. Let's pause it. And Oh, this actually, that is the name of the channel, is Terry Goodkind Audiobook Full. So this channel actually has all kinds of Terry Goodkind stuff. So that's cool. I should subscribe to him. I just realized that I wasn't. So what I'm going to do for this morning tea and crochet whip, we're going to listen to this book. I gave you the gist of it, of what's going on now. We're going to listen to this book as I whip it out. I like to listen to music. TV distracts me. See, you know what? And that's true too, Annie. I get distracted too much with TV because there are certain things that I want to watch. And because my eyes suck, I need things like this to see far away. I need to take them off to see up close. So when I've got to like take them on, put them on, take them on, put them on, take them on, put them off. Sorry, but that's just not very efficient, is it? It is not efficient. So when I'm not in the living room, I tend to do a book on tape thing. And I think that helps with getting things done too, because then I'm just able to work without taking a pause to look up at the screen and see what's going on. If it's something that I like, oh, what was that? Oh my God, I bet you they do. I bet you they do. So when I lived in Rockford, Illinois, I went to the library all the time. They had movies, DVDs. This is when, they didn't have Netflix, like streaming stuff wasn't super duper out there or anything like that. But they had movies to rent. I would rent movies all the freaking time over there. They had movies, and I'm almost positive they had books on tape. I wasn't a big books on tape person back then, but I feel like they definitely did. But there's so much in the library that people just don't know that's there, or they discount, and they don't see all the good that the library gives, and all the what's the word I'm thinking of, opportunities. The library in Rockford had like a computer area, right? For free. It was a time limit, but you were able to go ahead and hang out on the computer, whether you needed to do job stuff, whether you needed to do anything else, or just chill out, right? The mail came. I'm waiting for some seeds from Michigan Gardener. Not that I'm going to do anything with them today, but I am waiting for some seeds from Michigan Gardener. And they might be here today. They might be here tomorrow. They might have just gotten into my mailbox. We'll see. I'll go check the mail later. It's a little chilly actually right now. Today is going to be a chilly, rainy day. So it's a perfect day to sit and craft. Yay. I would definitely check out your local library for stuff like that, though. I would definitely check out your local library for stuff. They're a resource that people have forgotten about, truly. And it's sad. It's kind of sad. Because we need our libraries, man. We need them. I've got a bit of a mess here I've created. I got my yarn all tangled up. That is one of the... Yarn is so easy to get all tangled and ridiculous. Oh my God. Like, how do you keep it straight? Is that it? Yes, okay. Like, how do you keep this stuff straight, man? All right, let's go down here. I'm going to start my book on tape. We're going to hang out, listen to a book, and finish crocheting. Hi, baby. I love you.
In itself. I can't allow myself to make that mistake. You can find that
I go back a little bit so I know where I'm at.
It is real, and it punishes your body as well as your soul. Richard hooked a thumb under the baldric and let out a deep breath. He felt as if he were standing in quicksand, but the power is simply there. One use wins over the other.
Go back a little bit.
A reddish cast on one side, deepening. That tree, Richard frowned. Post is seeker. Richard spun to I'd to die by magic than say by a blade, as if somehow. Zed's voice was gentle. Calm down. The seeker, his muscles flexing powerfully, glowered into the other's tranquil eyes. Some part of him, deep in the back of his mind.
I don't remember that. I must have fallen asleep for a little bit of this.
His anger behind a locked door he didn't want open. Anger was wrong. That's what his father had taught him. Anger had the undoing of the boundary from within the underworld. He hung in the air. Zed's fists tightened. My help was offered, but turned away.
Okay, here we go. This is the part I
He
remember.
found the grass as it stumbled along. At last, the
Okay, so Zed is the wizard.
branches bend and sway in the breeze, testing the air with his nose. He searched for an alien movement. A fly. It's wide. Know this, though, Mother Confessor.
Ah, see, that's what she's called. She's a mother confessor. That's the girl that...
Seekers, you have never seen the real thing.
Okay, a little bit further.
Dark and Rawl will have him.
Dark and Rawl is the bad guy that's coming to get him and who wants to oversee the land.
Dear one, yes, I knew the old wizard once, but
Almost there.
Look, he has just come awake. Bring her around in the air. Now, twist the cloth around and around to squeeze the liquid out. When it's all out, throw the cloth and its contents in the fire. She looked at him, puzzled. Zed lifted an eyebrow. The part left in there is poison. Richard should be awake any time now. Then we give him the liquid in the bowl. You keep squeezing. I will check on him. Zed went into the bedroom, bent over Richard, and found him to be deeply unconscious. He turned and saw that Kaylin's back was to him as she worked at her task. He bent over, placing a middle finger to Richard's forehead. Richard's eyes snapped open. Dear one, Zed called into the other room. We are in luck. He has just come awake. Bring the bowl. Richard blinked. Zed, are you all right? Is everything all right? Yes, everything is fine. Kaylin came in holding the bowl carefully, trying not to spill any. Zed helped Richard sit up so he could drink. When he finished, Zed helped him to lie back down. That will make you sleep and break the fever. The next time you awake, you will be well. You have my word. So worry no more as you rest. Thank you, Zed. Richard was asleep before he could say more. Zed left and then returned with a tin plate, insisting that Kaylin take the chair. The thorn will not be able to stand the root, he explained. It will have to leave his body. He put the plate under Richard's hand and sat down on the edge of the bed to wait. They both listened to Richard's deep breathing and the crackling of the fire from the other room. Otherwise, the house was still. It was Zed who broke the silence first. It is dangerous for a confessor to travel alone, dear one. Where is your wizard? She looked up at him with tired eyes. My wizard sold his services to a queen. Zed gave a disapproving scowl. He abandoned his responsibilities to the confessors? What is his name? Giller. Giller. He repeated the name with a sour expression, then leaned toward her a bit. So why did another not come with you? She gave him a hard look. Because they are all dead at their own hands. Before they died, they all gathered and cast a web to see me safely through the boundary with the guidance of a night wisp. Zed stood at this news. Sadness and concern etched his face as he rubbed his chin. You knew the wizards? She asked. Yes, yes. I lived in the Midlands a long time. And the Great One? You know him also? Zed smiled, rearranged his robes, and seated himself again. You are persistent, dear one. Yes, I knew the old wizard once, but even if you could find him, I don't think he would have anything to do with this business. He would not be inclined to help the Midlands. Kaelin leaned forward, taking his hand in hers. Her voice was soft but intense. Zed, there are many people who disapprove of the High Council of the Midlands and its greed. They wish it were not so, but they are just common people who have no say. They only wish to live their lives in peace. Darken Rahl has taken the food that was stored for the coming winter and given it to the army. They waste it, or let it rot, or sell it back to the people they stole it from. Already there is hunger. This winter there will be death. Fire has been outlawed. People are cold. Rahl says it is all the great wizard's fault for not coming forward to be put on trial as an enemy of the people. He says the wizard has brought this on them, that he is to blame. He doesn't explain how this could be, but many believe it anyway. Many believe everything Rahl says, even though what they see with their own eyes should be enough to tell them otherwise. The wizards were under constant threat, and forbidden by edict from using magic. They knew that sooner or later they would be used against the people. They may have made mistakes in the past and disappointed their teacher, but the most important thing they were taught was to be protectors of the people and in no way to bring them harm. As their most loving act for the people, they gave their lives to stop Darken Rahl. I think their teacher would have been proud. But this is not about just the Midlands. The boundary between Dahara and the Midlands is down. The boundary between the Midlands and Westland is failing, and soon it too will be down. The people of Westland will be taken by the very thing they fear most: magic. Terrible, frightening magic like none they have ever imagined. Zed showed no emotion, offered no objection or opinion, only listened. He continued to allow her to hold his hands. All I have said, the great wizard could have an argument for. But the fact that Darken Rahl has put the 3 boxes of Orden into play is something altogether different. If he succeeds, then on the first day of winter it will be too late for anyone. That includes the wizard. Rahl already searches for him. It is personal vengeance he seeks. Many have died because they could not offer his name. When Rahl opens the correct box, though, he will have unchallenged power over all living things, and then the wizard will be his. He can hide in Westland all he wants, but come the first day of winter, his hiding is over. Darken Rahl will have him. There was bitterness in her expression. Zed, Darken Rahl has used quads to kill all the other confessors. I found my sister after they were finished with her. She died in my arms. With all the others dead, that leaves only me. The wizards knew their teacher did not want to help, so they sent me as the last hope. If he is too foolish to see that in helping us he helps himself, then I must use my power against him to make him help. Zed raised an eyebrow. And what is one dried-up old wizard to do against the power of this Darken Rahl? He was now holding her hands in his. He must appoint a seeker. What? Zed jumped to his feet. Dear one, you don't know what you are talking about. Confused, Kaelin leaned back a little. What do you mean? Seekers appoint themselves. The wizard just sort of recognizes what has happened and makes it official. I don't understand. I thought the wizard picked the person, the right person. Zed sat back down, rubbing his chin. Well, that's true in a sense, but backwards. A true seeker. One who can make a difference. must show himself to be a seeker. The wizard doesn't point to someone and say, "Here is the sword of truth, you will be the seeker." He doesn't really have a choice in the matter. It isn't something you can train someone for. One should simply be a seeker and show himself to be so by his actions. A wizard must watch a person for years to be sure. A seeker doesn't have to be the smartest person, but he has to be the right person. He has to have the right qualities within himself. A true seeker is a rare person. The seeker is a balance point of power. The council made the appointment a political bone to be thrown to one of the sniveling dogs at their feet. It was a sought-after post because of the power a seeker wields. But the council didn't understand. It wasn't the post that brought the power to the person. It was the person that brought the power to the post. He edged closer to her. "Caitlin, you were born after the council took this power upon itself, so you may have seen the seeker when you were young. But in those days, they were pretend seekers. You have never seen the real thing." His eyes got round in the telling, his voice low and full of passion. "I have seen a true seeker make a king quake in his boots with the asking of a single question. When a real seeker draws the sword of truth," he held his hands up and rolled his eyes in delight, "righteous anger can be an extraordinary thing to behold." Caleb smiled at his excitement. "It can make the good tremble with joy and the wicked shiver in fear." The smile left his face. "But people rarely believe the truth when they see it, and less so when they don't want to. And that makes the position of seeker a dangerous one. He is an obstacle to those who would subvert power. He draws lightning from many sides. Most often he stands alone and frequently not long." "I know the feeling well," she said, with only the hint of a smile. Zed leaned closer. "Against dark and raw, I doubt even a true seeker would last long. And then what?" She took up his hands again. "Zed, we must try. It is our only chance. If we don't take it, we have none." He sat up, pulling away from her. "Any person the wizard picks would not know the Midlands. He would have no chance there. It would be a sentence of quick death. That is the other reason I was sent, to be his guide, and stand with him to offer my life if need be to help protect him. Confessors spend their life traveling the lands. I have been almost everywhere in the Midlands. A confessor is trained from birth in languages. She has to be, because she never knows where she will be called. I speak every major language and most of the minor ones. And as far as drawing lightning, a confessor draws her fair share. If we were easy to kill, Raul would not need to send quads to get the job done. And many of them have died in the doing. I can help protect the seeker, if need be with my own life. What you propose not only would put someone's life at terrible risk as seeker, dear one, but yours also." She raised an eyebrow. "I am hunted now. If you have a better way, put words to it." Before Zed could answer, Richard moaned. The old man looked over at him and then rose. "It is time." Kaelin stood up next to him as he lifted Richard's arm by the wrist, holding the wounded hand over the tin plate. Blood dripped onto the plate with soft, hollow sounds. The thorn fell out with a small, wet splash. Kaelin reached for it. Zed grabbed her wrist. "Don't do that, dear one. Now that it has been expelled from its host, it will be anxious to have a new one. Watch." She took her hand back as he put his bony finger
Oops.
the plate several inches from the thorn. It wiggled its way toward the finger, leaving a thin trail of blood. He took his finger away and handed her the plate. "Hold it from underneath and take it to the heart. put it on the fire face down, and leave it there. While she did as Zed requested, he cleaned the wound and applied a salve. When Kaylin returned, he held Richard's hand while she wrapped it. Zed watched her hands as she worked. Why have you not told him what you are, that you are a confessor? There was a hard edge to his voice. Hers came back in kind. Because of the way you reacted when you recognized me as a confessor. She paused and the harshness left her voice. Somehow we have become friends. I am inexperienced in that, but I am very experienced at being a confessor. I have seen...
Sorry, checking on some things. Just checking on my sales stuff here.
Reactions like yours all my life. When I leave with the Seeker, I will tell him. Until then, I would very much like to have his friendship. Is that too much to ask, to be allowed the simple human pleasure of a friend? The friendship will end soon enough when I tell him. When she finished, Zed put a finger under her chin, raising her face to his gentle smile. When I first saw you, I reacted foolishly. Mostly to the surprise of seeing a confessor. I had not expected ever to see one again. I quit the Midlands to be free of the magic. You were an intrusion into my solitude. I apologize for my reaction and for making you feel unwelcome. I hope I have made it up to you. I am one who has respect for the confessors, perhaps more than you will ever know. You are a good woman, and you are welcome in my house. Kaylin looked into his eyes a long moment. Thank you, Zedicus Zul Sarander. Zed's expression turned more dangerous than hers had when they had first met. She stood frozen with his fingers still under her chin, afraid to move, her eyes wide. Know this, though, Mother. His voice was a step above a whisper and deadly. This boy has been my friend a good long time. If you touch him with your power, or if you choose him, you will answer to me, and you would not like that. Do you understand? She swallowed hard and managed to give a weak nod. Yes. Good. The danger left his face, leaving calm again in its place. He removed his finger from under her chin and began to turn to Richard. Kaylin let her breath out, and, not willing to be intimidated, grabbed his arm, turning him back to her. Zed, I would not do that to him. Not because of what you said, but because I care for him. I want you to understand that. They faced off a long while, each measuring the other. Zed's impish smile returned as disarming as ever. If offered a choice, dear one, that is the way I would prefer it. She relaxed, satisfied at having made her point, and gave him a quick hug that was returned earnestly. There is one thing you have left unspoken. You have not asked for my help in finding the wizard. No, and for now I won't. Richard fears what I would do if you were to say no. I promised I would not ask until he has a chance to ask you first. I gave him my word. Zed put a bony finger to his chin. How interesting. He laid his hand on her shoulder conspiratorially and changed the subject. You know, dear one, you might make a good seeker yourself. Me? A woman can be seeker? He lifted an eyebrow. Of course, some of the best seekers have been women. I already have an impossible job. She frowned. I don't need to. Zed chuckled, his eyes sparkling. Perhaps you are right. Now it's very late, dear one. Go to my bed in the next room and get yourself some needed sleep. I will sit with Richard. No. She shook her head and plopped down in the chair. I don't want to leave him for now. Zed shrugged. As you wish. He walked behind her and patted her shoulder reassuringly. As you wish. He gently reached up and put a middle finger to each of her temples, rubbing in little circles. She moaned softly as her eyes closed. Sleep, dear one, he whispered. Sleep. She folded her arms down onto the edge of the bed, and her head sank onto her arms. She was deeply asleep. After he put a blanket over her, Zed went to the front room and pulled open the door, looking out into the night. Cat, come here, I want you. The cat came running in and rubbed himself against Zed's legs, swishing his tail up. Zed bent down and scratched him behind the ears. Go in and sleep on the young woman's lap. Keep her warm. The cat padded off to the bedroom as the old man stepped out into the cold night air. The wind whipped Zed's robes as he walked the narrow path through the tall grass. The clouds were thin, illuminated by the moon, which gave enough light to see by, even though he didn't need it. He had walked the same route thousands of times. Nothing is ever easy, he muttered as he went. Near a stand of trees, he stopped, listening. Slowly he turned about, peering into the shadows, watching the branches bend and sway in the breeze, testing the air with his nose. He searched for an alien movement. A fly bit his neck. He swatted it angrily, picked the offender off his neck, and glared at it. Blood fly. Bags, I thought as much, he complained. From the brush nearby, something came toward him in a terrible rush. Wings and fur and teeth came charging. Hands on his hips, Zed waited. Just before it was on him, he held up a hand, bringing the short-tailed gar to a lurching halt. It was half again as tall as he, full-grown, and twice as fierce as a long-tailed gar. The beast growled and blinked, its great muscles flexing as it fought against the force that kept it from reaching out and grabbing the old man. It was furious that it had not yet killed him. Zed reached up and with a crooked finger beckoned it to lean closer. The gar, panting in rage, bent toward him. Zed jammed his finger hard under its chin.
What's up, Zeb? Cheers, hon. How you doing? Good to see you.
Twice and made a sound from deep
We're
in
working
his
on
throat.
crochet projects and listening to a book on tape.
I will
It's a
remember
chill,
it.
rainy day.
Tell me, do you wish to live or to die?
How are you
The
doing?
gar struggled to back away but was unable to. Good. Then you will do exactly as I say. Somewhere between here and Dahara, a quad comes this way. Hunt them and kill them. When you have done so, go back to Dahara to where you came from. Do these things and I will let you live. But I will remember your name, and if you fail to kill the quad or ever come back after your task is done, I will kill you and feed you to your flies. Do you agree to my terms? The gar grunted at acknowledgement. Good. Then be gone. Zed removed his finger from under the gar's chin. Scrambling to get away, the beast flapped its wings frantically, beating down the grass as it stumbled along. At last, the gar was airborne. Zed watched it as it circled, searching for the quad. As the hunt moved steadily east, the circles seemed to get smaller until the old man could no longer see the beast. Only then did he continue on to the top of the hill. Standing next to his cloud rock, Zed pointed down at it and began turning his bony finger in a circle as if stirring a stew. The massive rock grated against the ground as it tried to revolve with the movement of Zed's finger. The rock shuddered, trying to rotate its own weight. Popping and snapping, it fractured, sending hairline cracks shooting across its surface. Its trembling bulk struggled against the force being applied. The granular structure of the stone began to soften. Unable to maintain its state any longer, the texture of the rock liquefied enough to allow its mass to rotate with the movement of the finger above it. Gradually, the speed of Zed's stirring increased until light erupted from the rotating liquid rock. The light built in intensity with the speed of Zed's hand. As colors and sparkles of light spun, shadows and forms came into the center of the light and vanished as the fog of brightness increased. Light threatened to ignite the air about him. A dull roar, like the sound of wind rushing through a fissure, came forth. The smells of autumn changed to winter clarity, then spring's new plowed ground, summer's flowers, and back to autumn again. Clean, pure illumination chased the colors and sparkles away. The rock abruptly solidified, and Zed stepped atop it into the light. The brightness faded to a faint glow that swirled like smoke. Before him stood two apparitions, mere shadows of form. Where sharpness should have been,
4:30
their
in the
shapes
morning.
softened like a dim memory, yet they were still recognizable.
Oh,
And the sight
it
of
sucks to
brought a
wake up
quickness
before
to
your
Zed's
alarm,
heart.
dude.
His mother's voice came hollow.
That's like one of those things where you're like, can I really like get another 2 minutes out? Like, that was the worst for me. If I woke up before my alarm, I'm like, man, I just got cheated at like 5 minutes of sleep or a half an hour or whatever it may be. That's early. That's early, bro. Happy future, Zed. Happy tomorrow morning for you. How are you doing, Ed? Good to see you. We're making stuff today. I'm making a bigger version of a card holder. This is for tarot cards, and this one's going to be for oracle cards. And they'll go on the website when done.
When distant. What troubles you, son? Why have you called us after so many years? Her arms stretched out to him. Zed's arms reached out, but could not touch her. The two apparitions, mere shadows for clarity. Then spring's new plowed ground, summer's flowers, and back to autumn again. Clean, pure illumination chased the colors and sparkles away. The rock abruptly solidified, and Zed stepped atop it into the light. The brightness faded to a faint glow that swirled like smoke. Before him stood two apparitions, mere shadows of form. Where sharpness should have been, their shapes softened like a dim memory, yet they were still recognizable, and the sight of them brought a quickness to Zed's heart. His mother's voice came hollow and distant. What troubles you, son? Why have you called us after so many years? Her arms stretched out to him. Zed's arms reached out, but could not touch her. I am troubled by what the mother confessor tells me. She speaks the truth. He closed his eyes and nodded as his arms lowered with hers. It's true then. All my students, save Giller, are dead. You are the only one left to protect the mother confessor. She drifted closer. You must appoint the seeker. The High Council sowed these seeds, he protested, frowning. Now you want me to help? They turned my advice away. Let them live and die by their own greed. Zed's father floated closer. My son, why were you angry with your students? Zed scowled. Because they put themselves before their duty to help their people. I see. And how is this different from what you do now? The echo of his voice hung in the air. Zed's fists tightened. My help was offered but turned away. And when has it not been so? That there would be those who were blind or foolish or greedy. Would you let them have their way over you so easily? Would you let them so simply prevent you from helping those who would be helped? Your abandonment of the people may have a reason that seems just to you, unlike the actions of your students, but the results are the same. In the end, they saw their mistake and did the right things, the things you taught them. Learn from your students, son. Zedicus, his mother said, Would you let Richard die too, and all the other innocents? Appoint the Seeker. He's too young. She shook her head with a gentle smile. He will not get the chance to grow older. He has not passed my final test. Dark and Rahl hunts Richard. The cloud that shadows him was sent by Rahl to track him. The snake vine was put in the jar by Dark and Rahl, in the expectation that Richard would search for it and it would bite him. The snake vine wasn't meant to kill. Rahl sought to have him put to sleep by the fever until he could come for him. Her form drifted closer, her voice becoming more loving. You know in your heart you have been watching him, hoping he would show himself to be the one. To what avail? Zed closed his eyes, his chin sinking to his chest. Dark and Rahl has the 3 boxes of Orden. No, his father said. He has only 2. He still seeks the 3rd. Zed's eyes snapped open. His head jerked up. What? He doesn't have them all? No, his mother said. But he soon will. And the book. Surely he must have the Book of Counted Shadows. No, he searches for it. Zed put a finger to his chin, thinking. Then there's a chance, he whispered. What sort of fool would put the boxes of Orden in play before he had all 3 and the book? His mother's features sharpened into a look of ice. A very dangerous one. He travels the underworld. Zed stiffened, and his breath caught in his throat. His mother's eyes seemed to pierce him. That is how he was able to cross the boundary and recover the first box, by traveling the underworld. That is how he was able to begin the undoing of the boundary from within the underworld. He commands some in it, more with his every coming. If you choose to help, be warned. Do not go through the boundary or send the Seeker through. Rahl expects it. If you enter, he will have you. The Mother Confessor came through only because he did not expect it. He will not make the same mistake again. But then how am I to get us to the Midlands? I can't help if I can't get to the Midlands. Zed's voice was tense with frustration. We're sorry, but we don't know. We believe there must be a way, but it is not known to us. That is why you must appoint the Seeker. If he is the right one, he will find a way. Their forms began to shimmer, to fade. Wait, I must have the answers to my questions. Please, don't leave me. We're sorry, it is not our choice. We are called back behind the veil. Why is Rahl after Richard? Please help me. His father's voice was weak and distant. We don't know. You must search for the answers yourself. We have trained you well. You are more talented than we ever were. Use what you were taught and what you feel. We love you, son. Until this is settled one way or the other, we cannot come to you again. With Orden in play, coming again could tear the veil. His mother kissed her hand and held it out to him as he did the same in return. And then they were gone. Zedicus Zul-Zarander, the great and honorable wizard, stood alone on the wizard's rock his father had given him and stared out into the night, thinking wizard's thoughts. Nothing is ever easy, he whispered. Chapter 8. Richard came awake with a start. Warm midday light filled the room, and the wonderful tangy aroma of spice soup filled his lungs. He was in his room at Zed's house. He looked up at the familiar knots in the wood walls, and the faces he always made them into in his mind stared back. The door to...
Oh no, Zeb. So a lot of unexpected work to do today, huh? Oh my God. So you're literally 4 hours before you have to do anything? What? I'd be going through my to-do list to see what I can get done, or I'd be going back to bed. One of the two. That kind of sucks though. I'm not gonna lie. Good skills there. Oh, thanks, hon. I appreciate that. Thank you. This is what I'm making. This is a bigger form of it. See how we are doing with size here. Wrap it up. We need to make sure we have enough room for 3. Yeah, 1, 2, almost there. I'm going to go a little further. Right there. Right there. Probably another 7 rows, maybe. Here. Whoopsie daisy. This. Oh, I told her. Snug as a bug in a rug.
Front room stood shut. A chair waited next to the bed, empty. He sat up, pushing the covers down, and saw that he still wore his dirty clothes. He felt for the tooth under his shirt and sighed in relief when he found it still there, safe. A short stick held the window open a few inches, letting in fresh air and the sound of Kaylin's laughter. Zed must be telling stories, he thought. Richard looked at his left hand. It was wrapped, but no longer sore when he flexed his fingers. His head didn't hurt anymore either. In fact, he felt wonderful. Hungry, but wonderful. He amended that to dirty and filthy clothes and hungry, but wonderful. A tub of bathwater, soap, and clean towels sat in the center of the small room. A clean outfit of his forest garb was folded and stacked neatly on the chair. The bathwater looked deliciously inviting. He dipped his hand in and found the water warm. Zed must have known when he would wake. Knowing Zed as well as he did, that didn't surprise him. Richard undressed and slipped into the welcoming water. The soap smelled almost as good to him as the soup. He liked to stay in the tub for a good long soak, but he felt too wide awake for soaking and was eager to be outside with the other two. Unwrapping the hand, he was surprised to find how much it had healed overnight. When he came out, Kaylin and Zed were sitting at the table waiting for him. Kaylin's dress was freshly washed, he noticed, and she looked bathed, too. Her hair was clean and glistened in the sunlight. Green eyes sparkled up at him. A big bowl of soup waited for him next to her at the table, along with cheese and fresh bread. I wouldn't have expected to have slept until noon, he said, swinging his leg over the bench. They both laughed. Richard eyed them suspiciously. Kaylin straightened her face. This is the second noon you have slept to, Richard. Yes, Zed added. You slept right through the first. How do you feel? How is your hand? I'm fine. Thank you, Zed, for helping me. Thank you both. He opened and closed his fingers to show them the improvement. The hand feels much better, except it itches. My mother always said that if it itched, that meant it was getting better. Richard grinned at her. Mine too. He fished a piece of potato and a mushroom into his spoon and tasted it. It's as good as mine, he said to her earnestly. She sat crosswise on the bench, facing toward him, her elbow resting on the table with the side of her jaw nestled in the heel of her hand. She gave him a knowing smile. Zed tells it differently. Richard cast a reproachful eye at Zed, who looked up at the sky in an exaggerated manner. Does he now? I will have to remind him of that the next time he is begging me to make it for him. Frankly, she said in a low voice, but not low enough that Zed couldn't hear. From what I've seen, I think he would eat dirt if someone else dished it up for him. Richard laughed. I see you've gotten to know him well. I tell you, Richard, the old man said, pointing a bony finger, not about to let them get the best of him. She could make dirt taste good. You would do well to take lessons from her. Richard broke off a piece of bread and dunked it in the soup. He knew that joking was a release for the tension he sensed, a way to pass the time while they both waited for him to finish. Kaylin had given Richard her word that she would wait for him to ask Zed's help. It was apparent that she had kept her word. And Zed's way was to play ignorant and innocent and wait for you to ask something first so he could better judge what you already knew. This day, Richard could not allow any of his games. This day, things were different. There is one thing I don't trust about her, though. Zed's tone was dark, menacing. Richard froze in mid-chew. He swallowed and waited, not daring to look at either of them, while the other paused. She doesn't like cheese. I don't think I could ever trust anyone who doesn't like cheese. It's not natural. Richard relaxed. Zed was just twiddling with his mind, as he always called it. His old friend seemed to have a knack for catching him off guard, and he delighted in it. Richard stole a glance at Zed to see him sitting there with an innocent smile on his face. Richard smiled, too, in spite of himself. While he relished the bowl of soup, Zed nibbled on a piece of cheese to make his point. Kaylin nibbled on a piece of bread to make hers. The bread tasted delicious. Kaylin was pleased when he pointed it out. As Richard neared the end of his meal, he decided it was time to change the tone of things back to business. The next quad, has there been any sign? No. I was worried, but Zed did a cloud reading for me and said it appeared they must have run into trouble of some kind, since they were nowhere to be found. He gave Zed a sideways glance. Is that true? True as toasted toads. Zed had used the expression since Richard was young, to win him over with humor and let him know he could always trust the old man to be truthful with him above all else. Richard wondered what sort of trouble a quad could run into. For better or worse, he had succeeded in changing the mood at the table. He felt Kaylin's impatience for him to get on with it, and he sensed impatience in Zed, too. Kaylin turned back to the table and put both hands in her lap, waiting. Richard feared that if he didn't handle things properly, she would do whatever it was she was here to do, and he would have no control over it. Richard finished his meal and pushed the bowl away with his thumbs, at the same time meeting Zed's eyes. His friend's humor was gone, but otherwise he showed nothing of what he was thinking. He simply waited. It was Richard's turn now, and once he began, there could be no going back. Zed, my friend, we need your help to stop Dark and Rawl. I know. You want me to find the wizard for you? No, that won't be necessary. I have already found him. Richard felt Kaylin's questioning eyes on him, but he continued to fix his gaze on Zed. You are the great wizard. Kaylin began to rise from the bench. Without taking his eyes from Zed, Richard reached under the table and clutched her forearm, forcing her to sit back down. Still, Zed showed no emotion. His voice came even and soft. And what makes you think this, Richard? Richard took a deep breath, letting it out slowly as he put his hands on the table, intertwining his fingers. He watched his hands as he spoke. When Kaylin first told me about the history of the three lands, she said the council had taken actions that made the death of the wizard's wife and daughter at the hands of a quad stand for nothing. And as punishment, the wizard did the worst thing possible to them. He left them to suffer the consequences of their own actions. That sounded like the very thing you would do, but I couldn't be sure then. I had to find a way to know. When you first saw Kaylin and were angry that she had come here from the Midlands, I told you she had been attacked by a quad. I watched your eyes. They told me I was right. Only someone who had suffered a loss like yours would have had that look in his eyes. And you changed your attitude toward her after I told you, completely. Only someone who had known the terror personally would have that kind of empathy. But still, I didn't trust my instinct. I waited. He looked up at Zed and held the other's gaze while he spoke. Your biggest mistake was when you told Kaylin she was safe here. You would not lie, especially about something like that. And you know what a quad is. How could an old man make it safe here against a quad without magic? He couldn't, but one old wizard could. The next quad is nowhere to be found. You said so yourself. They ran into some trouble. I think they ran into some wizard trouble. You were as good as your word. You always are. Richard's voice turned gentler. I have always known in 1,000 little ways that you were more than you claimed to be, that you were a special person. I have always been honored to have you as my friend, and I know that as my friend you would do anything, anything you must, to help me if my life were in danger, just as I would do anything for you. I trust you with my life, and it is now in your hands. Richard hated closing the trap in this fashion, but all their lives were at risk. There could be no games. Zed put his hands on the table and leaned forward. I have never before been this proud of you, Richard. His eyes told that he meant it. You got it all right. He stood and came around the table. When Richard stood, they hugged. I have also never been this sad for you. Zed held Richard in a tight embrace for a moment longer. Sit. I will be right back. I have something for you. Both of you sit and wait a moment. Zed cleared the table. Then, holding the plates in the crook of his arm, he strode to the house. Kaylin looked worried as she watched him go. Richard had thought that she would be happy to have found the wizard, but now she looked more frightened than anything else. Things were going differently from what he had expected. When Zed reappeared, he was carrying something long. Kaylin came to her feet. Richard realized Zed's fist clutched the scabbard of a sword. Kaylin put herself in front of him before he reached the table, grabbing fistfuls of his robes. Don't do this, Zed. Her voice was desperate. It is not my choice. Zed, please, no. Choose someone else, not Richard. Zed cut her off. Kaylin, I warned you about this. I told you, he picks himself. If I choose someone other than the true one, we all die. If you have a better way, put words to it. He swept her aside, came to the side of the table opposite Richard, and slammed the sword down in front of him. Richard jumped. He looked from the sword up into Zed's fierce eyes as the other leaned over the table. This belongs to you, the wizard said. Kaylin turned her back to them. Richard's gaze fell upon the sword. The silver scabbard gleamed with gold flourishes that embellished it in sweeps and waves. Steel crossguards swept out and down aggressively. Finely twisted silver wire covered the grip, and interwoven along the side of the braided silver, gold wire formed the word truth. This, Richard thought, was the sword of a king. It was the finest weapon he had ever seen. Slowly, he rose to his feet. Zed picked up the scabbard by the point and held the hilt of the sword to Richard. Draw it. As if in a trance, Richard closed his fingers around the hilt and pulled the sword free, the blade making a ringing metallic sound that hung in the air. Richard had never heard a sword make a sound quite like it. His fingers around the hilt and pulled the sword free, the blade making a ringing metallic sound that hung in the air. Richard had never heard a sword make a sound quite like it. His hand closed tightly around the grip, and in his palm and on his fingers opposite, he could feel the bumps of the gold wire that spelled out the word truth on each side of the hilt, pressing almost painfully into his flesh. Inexplicably, it felt precisely correct. The weight fit him exactly. He felt as if a part of him was now complete. From deep within, he felt his anger stir, brought to life, searching direction. He was suddenly aware of the tooth against his chest. As his rage rose, he felt an awakening power rushing into it from the sword, the twin to his own anger. His own feelings had always seemed independent, whole. This was like having an image in a mirror come to life. It was a terrifying specter. His anger fed on the force from the sword, and in return, this was like having an image in a mirror come to life. It was a terrifying specter. His anger fed on the force from the sword, and in return the wrath from the sword fed on his anger. Together the twin storms spiraled through him. He felt like a helpless bystander being dragged along. It was a frightening and at the same time seductive sensation that bordered on violation. Fearful perceptions of his own anger twisted with tantalizing promise. The bewitching emotions rushed headlong through him, seizing his anger, soaring with it. Richard struggled to control the rage. He was on the brink of panic, on the brink of abandon. Zedicus Zul'Zarander threw his head back and spread his arms. To the sky he called out, "Fair warning to those living and those dead. The Seeker is named." Thunder from the blue sky shook the ground and rolled off toward the boundary. Kaylin fell to her knees in front of Richard, head bowed, hands held behind her back. "I pledge my life in the defense of the Seeker." Zed knelt beside her, his head bowed. "I pledge my life in the defense of the Seeker." Richard stood, gripping the sword of truth in his hand, eyes wide in breathless bewilderment. "Zed," he whispered, "what in the name of everything good is a Seeker?" Chapter 9. With the aid of a hand to his knee, Zed rose to his feet, rearranged his robes around his bony body, and held his hand out to Kaylin, who was staring at the ground. Noticing the hand, she took it, coming to her feet as well. Her face bore a distressed expression. Zed considered her for a moment, and she nodded that she was all right. Zed turned to Richard. "What is a Seeker? A wise first question in your new capacity, but not one swiftly answered." Richard gazed down at the gleaming sword in his hand, not at all sure he wanted anything to do with it. He slid it back into its scabbard, glad to be free of the feelings it invoked, and held it in both hands before him. "Zed, I've never seen this before. Where have you kept it?" Zed smiled proudly. "In the cabinet, in the house." Richard eyed him skeptically. "There's nothing in the cabinet but dishes and pans and your powders." "Not that cabinet," he said, lowering his voice as if to thwart anyone who might be listening. "In my wizard's cabinet." Richard straightened with a frown. "I've never seen any other cabinet." "Bags, Richard, you're not supposed to see it. It's a wizard's cabinet. It's invisible." Richard felt more than a little stupid. "And how long have you had this?" "Oh, I don't know. Maybe a dozen years or so." Zed swept his slender hand in the air as if trying to brush the question away. "And how did you come to have it?" Zed's tone hardened. "The naming of the Seeker is a wizard's task. The High Council wrongly took it upon itself to name the person. They didn't care anything about finding the right person. They gave the post to whoever suited them at the time, or whoever offered the most. The sword belongs to the Seeker as long as he is alive or as long as he chooses to be Seeker. In between, while a new Seeker is sought, the sword of truth belongs to the wizards. Or more precisely, it belongs to me, as naming Seekers is my responsibility. The last fellow who had it became..." His eyes turned up, as if searching the sky for the right word. "Entangled with a witch woman. So while he was distracted, I went into the Midlands and retrieved what is mine. Now it is yours." Richard felt himself being drawn into something not of his own choosing. He looked to Kaylin. She seemed to have shed her anguish and was unreadable again. This is what you came here for? This is what you wanted the wizard to do? Richard, I wanted the wizard to name a seeker. I did not know it would be you. He was beginning to feel trapped as he looked from one to the other. You two think I can somehow save us. That's what you both are thinking. That somehow I'm to stop Dark and Rawl. A wizard can't do it, but I'm to try? Terror rose with his heart into his throat. Zed came and put a reassuring arm around his shoulder. Richard, look up in the sky. Tell me what you see. Richard looked and saw the snake-like cloud. He didn't need to answer the question. Zed pressed his strong, bony fingers into Richard's flesh. Come, sit, and I will tell you what you need to know. Then you decide for yourself what it is you will do. Come. He put his other arm around Kalen's shoulder and guided them both to the bench at the table. He went to his place opposite them and sat. Richard laid the sword on the table between them to signify that the matter was yet to be decided. Zed pushed his sleeves up his arms a little. There is a magic, he began. An ancient and dangerous magic of immense power. It's a magic spawned from the earth, from life itself. It is held in 3 vessels called the 3 boxes of Orden. The magic is dormant until the boxes are put into play, as it is called. To do so is not easy. It requires a person who has knowledge gained from long scholarship and who can call upon considerable power of his own. Once a person has at least one of the boxes, the magic of Orden can be put in play. He then has 1 year from that time to open a box, but he must have all 3 before any will open. They work together. You can't simply have one and open it. If the person who puts them in play fails to acquire all 3 and to open one within the allotted time, he forfeits his life to the magic. There is no going back. Dark and Rawl must open one of the boxes or die. On the first day of winter, his year is up. Zed's face was tight with hard wrinkles and determination. He leaned forward a little. Each box holds a different power, which is released upon its opening. If Rawl opens the correct one, he gains the magic of Orden, the magic of life itself. Power over all things living and dead. He will have unchallenged power and authority. He will be a master with immutable dominion over all people. Anyone he doesn't like, he will be able to kill with a thought, in any manner of his choosing, wherever that person is, no matter how far away. Sounds like a terribly evil magic, Richard said. Zed leaned back, taking his hands from the table. He shook his head. No, not really. The magic of Orden is the power of life. Like all power, it simply exists. It's the user who determines what use it will be put to. The magic of Orden can just as easily be used to help crops grow, to heal the sick, to end conflict. It's all in what the user wants. The power is neither evil nor good. It simply exists. It is up to the mind of man to put it to use. I think we all know which use Dark and Rawl would choose. Zed paused, as was his way, to let Richard ponder the meaning of what he had been told. His thin face fixed in resolve as he waited. Kalen, too, had a look that told him she was determined to have him fully understand the ominous nature of what Zed was saying. Richard, of course, didn't need to ponder it, since he knew it all from the Book of Counted Shadows. The book was explicit. From the book, he knew Zed was barely touching on the full extent of the cataclysm that would sweep the land if Dark and Rawl opened the correct box. He knew also what would happen if one of the other boxes was opened, but he couldn't reveal his foreknowledge, and so had to ask anyway. And if he opens one of the others? Zed came forward against the table in a blink. He had expected that this would be the next question. Open the wrong box, and the magic claims him. He's dead. Zed snapped his fingers. Just like that. We are all safe. The threat is removed. He leaned closer, his brow furrowed, and gave Richard a hard look. Open the other wrong box, and every bug, every blade of grass, every tree, every man, woman, and child, every living thing is incinerated into nothingness. It would be the end of all life. The magic of Orden is twin to the magic of life itself, and death is part of everything that lives. So the magic of Orden is tied to death as well as life. Zed sat back, seeming to be overwhelmed by the telling of the choices of catastrophe. Though Richard already knew it all, he still swallowed hard at hearing it out loud. Somehow it seemed more real to him like this, more real when there was a name put to it. When he had learned the book, it was all so abstract, so hypothetical, that he had never given any thought to the possibility that it would come to pass. His only concern had been that the knowledge be preserved so as to be returned to its keeper. He wished he could tell Zed what he knew, but his oath to his father prevented him from saying anything. It also required him to keep up the pretense by asking another question to which he already knew the answer. How will Rawl know which box to open? Zed rearranged the sleeves of his robes and looked down at the table, watching his hands as he spoke. Putting the boxes in play imparts to the person certain privileged information. It must be that this information tells him how he can discover which box is which. That made sense. No one knew of the book but its keeper, and, it appeared, the person who put the boxes in play. The book made no reference to this, but it seemed logical. A sudden jolt went through him. Dark and Rawl must be after him for the book. He almost didn't hear Zed beginning to speak again. Rawl has done something out of the ordinary, though. He has put the boxes in play before he has all three. Richard came to attention immediately. He must be stupid or very confident. Confident, the wizard said. When I left the Midlands, it was for two main reasons. The first was because the High Council took the naming of the Seeker upon itself. The second was because they mishandled the boxes of Orden. People had come to believe that the power of the boxes was just a legend. They thought me an old fool for telling them it was no legend but the truth. They refused to heed my warnings. He pounded his fist down on the table, causing Kaelin to jump. They laughed at me. His face was red with anger, making it stand out all the more against the mass of his white hair. I wanted the boxes kept far apart from each other, and with magic hidden and locked away so as to never be found again. The council instead wanted them given to important people like trophies to be shown off. They used them as payments for favors or promises. This exposed the boxes to covetous hands. I don't know what happened to them in the intervening years. Rawl has at least one, but not all three. Not yet, anyway. Zed's eyes flashed with fervor. Do you see, Richard? We don't have to go up against Dark and Rawl. We have only to find at least one of the boxes before he does. And keep it from him, which may prove considerably harder than finding it, Richard pointed out, letting the words hang in the air a moment. He had a sudden thought. Zed, do you think one of the boxes could be here in Westland? Not likely. Why not? Zed hesitated. Richard, I never told you I was a wizard, but you never asked before, so I didn't really lie about it. I did tell you one lie, though. I told you I came here before the boundary went up. In reality, I didn't come here before it went up, because I couldn't. You see, in order to create a Westland free of magic, there could be none here when the boundary went up. Magic could come here after the boundary was established, but not be here before. Since I have magic, my presence would have prevented it from happening, so I had to stay in the Midlands until after, and only then was I able to come through. Everyone has their little secrets. I don't begrudge you yours. But what's your point? My point is, we know none of the boxes could have been here before the boundary went up, or the magic would have prevented it. So if they were all in the Midlands before the boundary because of the magic, and I didn't bring one with me, they have to still be in the Midlands. Richard thought about this a while, feeling his spark of hope die. He turned his thoughts back to the matter at hand. You still have not told me what a seeker is, or my part in this. Zed folded his hands together. A seeker is a person who answers to no one but himself. He is a law unto himself. The sword of truth is his to wield as he wishes, and within the limits of his own strength, he can hold anyone to answer for anything. Zed held up his hand to forestall Richard's objections and questions. I realize this is vague. The problem with explaining it is that it is like all power. As I told you before, it's how the person uses power that makes it what it is. This is the core of why it is so important to find the right person, a person who will use the power wisely. You see, Richard, a seeker does exactly as the name implies. He seeks. He seeks the answers to things of his own choosing. If he is the right person, he will seek the answers that will help others, not just himself. The whole purpose of a seeker is to be free to quest on his own, to go where he wants, ask what he wants, learn what he wants, find answers to what he wants to know, and if need be, do whatever it is the answers demand. Richard straightened, his voice rising. Are you telling me a seeker is an assassin? I won't lie to you, Richard. There have been times when it has turned out that way. Richard's face was crimson. I will not be an assassin, Zed shrugged. As I said, a seeker is whatever he wants. Ideally, a seeker is the standard bearer of justice. I can't tell you much more because I've never been one. I don't know what goes on in their heads. However, I know the proper kind of person. Zed pushed his sleeves up again while he watched Richard. But I don't pick a seeker, Richard. A true seeker picks himself. I only name them. You have been a seeker for years without knowing it. I have watched you, and that is what you do. You are always seeking the truth. What do you think you were doing in the High Ven? You were seeking the answer to the vine to your father's murder. You could have left that to others more qualified. And as it turned out, perhaps you should have. But that would have been against your nature. The nature of a seeker. They don't leave it to others because they want to know for themselves. When Kaylin told you she was looking for a wizard who was lost since before she was born, you had to know who it was, and you found it. But that's only because Zed cut him off. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. Only one thing matters, that you did it. I saved you with the root I found. Does it matter that it was easy for me to find the root? No. Would you be any more alive if it had been extremely difficult for me to find the root? No. I found the root, you are well. That is all that matters. Same with the seeker. It's of no importance how he finds an answer, only that he does. As I said, there are no rules. Right now, there are answers you must find. I don't know how you will do so, and I don't care, only that you do. If you say, oh, that's simple, all the better, as we don't have much time. Richard's guard went up. What answers? Zed smiled, and his eyes sparkled. I have a plan, but you must first find a way to get us across the boundary. What? Richard ran his fingers through his hair in exasperation.
Okay, so now this is the length that I needed. Our next step is to slip stitch all the way around so that we have a nice even edge, just so it's not, it's all nice and even all the way around from the top. It's got a nice edge there. It's the difference of the edges. It doesn't have a nice edge, really. This one has a nice edge. So slip stitch all the way around the square, and then we're going to fold it up to where we need it for the pocket, and then we're going to slip stitch that together on the sides. Okay, and then we'll find the centerpiece and make our little ties, and we'll put a little charm on the end of it. Almost done with this, you guys. Super excited. Almost there.
Muttering his disbelief under his breath, he looked back to Zed. You're a wizard. You had something to do with putting the boundary there in the first place. You have just said you have been through it to retrieve the sword. Kalen has come through the boundary sent by wizards. I know nothing of the boundary. If you expect me to find you the answer, well, here it is. Zed, you are a wizard. Send us through the boundary. Zed shook his head. No, I said across the boundary, not through it. I know how to go through it, but we can't do that. Raoul waits for us to do so. If we try to go through, he will kill us. If we are lucky. We must instead go across it without going through it. There is a big difference. Zed, I'm sorry, but it's impossible. I don't know anything about how to get us across. I don't see how it can be done. The boundary is the underworld. If we can't go through it, then we are stuck here. The whole purpose of the boundary is to prevent anyone from doing just what you are asking me to do. Richard felt helpless. They were depending on him, and he didn't have any answers. Zed's voice was kind and gentle. Richard, you are too quick to criticize yourself. What is it you say when I ask how you must solve difficult problems? Richard knew what Zed was talking about, but was reluctant to answer, as he felt answering only pulled him in deeper. Zed lifted an eyebrow, waiting. Richard looked down at the table, picking at the wood with his thumbnail. Think of the solution, not the problem. And right now you are doing it backwards. You are only concentrating on why the problem is impossible. You are not thinking of the solution. Richard knew Zed was right, but there was more to it. Zed, I don't think I'm qualified to be Seeker. I don't know anything about the Midlands. Sometimes it is easier to make a decision if you aren't burdened with the knowledge of history, the wizard said cryptically. Richard let out a deep breath. I don't know the place. I'd be lost there. Kaylin put her hand on his forearm. No, you wouldn't. I know the Midlands better than almost anyone. I know where it is safe and where it is not. I'll be your guide. You will not be lost, I promise you that much. Richard looked away from her green eyes and down at the table. It hurt to think that he might disappoint her, but her faith and Zed's didn't seem justified. He didn't know anything about the Midlands, or the magic, or how to find some boxes, or how to stop Dark and Rawl. He didn't know how to do any of it. And for his first trick, he was supposed to get them across the boundary. Richard, I know you think I'm thrusting this responsibility on you unwisely, but it is not me who chooses you. You are the one who has shown himself to be the Seeker. I have only recognized the fact. I have been a wizard a long time. You don't know what that entails, but you have to trust me when I say that I'm qualified to recognize the one. Zed reached across the table, across the sword, and put his hand on Richard's. His eyes were somber. Dark and Rawl hunts you, personally. The only reason I can fathom for this is that with the insight he has gained from the magic of Orden, he too knows you to be the one, and so searches you out to eliminate the threat. Richard blinked in surprise. Maybe Zed was right. Maybe this was the reason Rawl hunted him. Or maybe not. Zed didn't know about the book. He felt as if his mind would explode with all the things filling his head, and suddenly he couldn't sit anymore. He stood up and began pacing, thinking. Zed folded his arms across his chest. Kaylin leaned an elbow on the table. Both watched in silence as he paced. The wisp had said to seek the answer or die. It didn't say it was necessary to become this Seeker. He could find the answers in his own way, as he always had. He hadn't needed the sword to figure out who the wizard was, although it hadn't been that hard. But what was wrong with taking the sword? What could it hurt to have its help? Wouldn't it be foolish to turn down any assistance? Apparently the sword could be put to any use its owner wanted, so why not use it in the way he wanted? He didn't have to become an assassin or anything else. He could use it to help them. That was all. That was all that was needed or wanted. No more. But Richard knew why he didn't want it. He didn't like the way it had felt when he had drawn the sword. It had felt good, and that bothered him. It had stirred his anger in a way that frightened him, made him feel like he had never felt before. The most disconcerting thing was that it felt right. He didn't want to feel right about anger, didn't want to lose his control of it. Anger was wrong. That's what his father had taught him. Anger had killed his mother. He kept his anger behind a locked door he didn't want opened. No, he would do this in his own way, without the sword. He didn't need it. Didn't need the worry of it. Richard turned to Zed, who still sat with his arms folded across his chest, watching. The sunlight gave Zed's wrinkles deep shadows. The lines and sharp angles of his familiar face seemed somehow different. He looked grim, resolute, somehow more like a wizard. Their eyes met and held each other. Richard was decided. He would tell his friend no. He would help and would stand by them. His life, too, depended on this. But he would not be the seeker. Before he could say so, Zed spoke. Kaelin, tell Richard how Dark and Rahl questions people. His voice was quiet, calm. He didn't look at her, instead continuing to hold Richard's eyes. Her voice was barely audible. Zed, please, tell him. This time his voice was harder, more forceful. Tell him what he does with the curved knife he keeps at his belt. Richard looked away from Zed's eyes to her pale face. After a moment, she held out her hand and looked up at him with sad green eyes, beckoning him to come to her. He stood a moment, wary, then came and took her hand. She pulled him down toward her. He sat, straddling the bench, facing her, waiting for what it was she was bidden to say, fearing it. Kaelin shifted toward him, hooking some hair behind an ear, and looked down at his right hand as she held it in both of hers, stroking the back of it with her thumbs. Her fingers were gentle, soft, and warm against his palm. The size of her hands made his seem awkwardly large. She spoke quietly and didn't look up. Dark and Rahl is a practitioner of an ancient form of magic called anthropomancy. He divines the answers to questions by the inspection of living human entrails. Richard felt his anger ignite. It's of limited use. He can at most get a yes or no to a single question, and sometimes a name. Nonetheless, he continues to favor its use. I'm sorry, Richard. Please forgive me for telling you this. Memories of his father's kindness, his laughter, his love, his friendship, their time together with the secret book, and 1,000 other brief glimpses tore through him in a flood of anguish. The scenes and sounds converged into dim shadows and hollow echoes in Richard's mind and melted away. In its place, memories of the bloodstains on the floor, the white faces of the people there, images of his father's pain and terror, and the things Chase had told him flashed vividly in snatches through his mind. He didn't try to stop them, but instead pulled them onward, hungering for them. He washed himself in the detail of it all, felt the twisting torment. Pain flared up from a pit deep inside him. Invoked heedlessly, it came screaming forth. In his mind, he added the shadowed figure of Dark and Rahl, hands dripping crimson blood standing over his father's body, holding the red, glinting blade. He held the vision before him, twisting it, inspecting it, drinking it into his soul. The picture was complete now. He had his answers. He knew how it had been, how his father had died. Until now, that was all he had ever sought, answers. In his whole life, he had never gone beyond that simple quest. In one white-hot instant, that changed. The door that held back his anger and the wall of reason containing his temper burned away in a flash of hot desire. A lifetime of rational thinking evaporated before his searing fury. Lucidity became dross in a cauldron of molten need. Richard reached out to the sword of truth, curled his fingers around the scabbard, gripping it tighter and tighter until his knuckles were white. The muscles in his jaw flexed. His breathing came fast and sharp. He saw nothing else of what was around him. The heat of anger surged forth from the sword, not of its own volition, but summoned by the seeker. Richard Zed's chest heaved with the burning hurt of his grief at knowing now what had happened to his father. And with that knowledge, there was closure, too. Thoughts he had never permitted himself to have became his only desire. Caution and consequence vanished before a flood of lust for vengeance. In that instant, his only want, his only desire, his only need was to kill Dark and Rawl. Nothing else had any significance. With his other hand, he reached out and seized the hilt of his sword to pull it free. Zed's hand clamped down over his. The Seeker's eyes snapped up, livid at the interference. "Richard," Zed's voice was gentle. "Calm down." The Seeker, his muscles flexing powerfully, glowered into the other's tranquil eyes. Some part of him, deep in the back of his mind, kept warning him, trying to regain control. He ignored the warning. He bent over the table to the wizard, his teeth gritted. "I accept the position of Seeker." "Richard," Zed repeated calmly. "It's all right. Relax. Sit down." The world came rushing back into his mind. He pulled his readiness to kill back a notch, but not his rage. Not only the door, but also the wall that had contained his anger was gone. Even though the world about him had returned, it was a world seen through different eyes. Eyes he had always had, but had been afraid to use. The eyes of a Seeker. Richard realized that he was standing. He didn't remember getting up. He sat again next to Kaelin, removing his hands from the sword. Something inside him regained control of his anger. It wasn't the same as before, though. It didn't shut it away. It didn't lock it behind a door, but pulled it back, unafraid, to make it ready when needed again. Some of his old self seeped back into his mind, calming him, slowing his breathing, reasoning within him. He felt liberated, unafraid, unashamed of his temper for the first time. He allowed himself to sit there while he uncoiled, feeling his muscles relax. He looked up into Zed's calm, undisturbed face. The old man, his thatch of white hair framing an angular face set in a perceptive cast, studied him, assessed him with the slightest hint of a smile fixed at the corners of his thin mouth. "Congratulations," the wizard said. "You have passed my final test to become Seeker." Richard pulled back in confusion. "What do you mean? You already appointed me Seeker." Zed shook his head slowly. "I told you before, weren't you listening? A Seeker appoints himself. Before you could become Seeker, you had to pass one determinative test. You had to show me you could use all your mind. For many years, Richard, you have kept part of it locked away. Your anger. I had to know you could release it, call upon it. I've seen you angry, but you are unable to admit your anger to yourself. A Seeker who couldn't allow himself to use his anger would be hopelessly weak. It is the strength of rage that gives the heedless drive to prevail. Without the anger, you would have turned down the sword and I would have let you, because you wouldn't have had what was required. But that is irrelevant now. You have proven you are no longer a prisoner to your fears. Be cautioned, though. As important as it is to be able to use your rage, it is equally important to be able to restrain it. You have always had that ability. Don't let yourself lose it now. You must be wise enough to know which path to choose. Sometimes letting out the anger is an even more grievous mistake than holding it in. Richard nodded solemnly. He thought about the way it felt to hold the sword when he was in the rage, the way he felt its power, the liberating sensation of giving himself over to the primal urge from within himself and from the sword. "The sword has magic," he said guardedly. "I felt it." "It does. But Richard, magic is only a tool, like any other. When you use a whetstone to sharpen a knife, you are simply making the knife work better for its intended purpose. Same way with the magic. It's just a honing of the intent." Zed's eyes were clear and sharp. Some people are more terrified to die by magic than, say, by a blade, as if somehow one is less dead if killed by a blow or a cut than if killed by the unseen. But listen well, dead is dead. The fear of the magic, though, can be a powerful weapon. Keep that in mind. Richard nodded. The late afternoon sun warmed his face, and out of the corner of his eye he could see the cloud. Rawl would be watching it too. Richard remembered the man from the quad on Blunt Cliff, how he had pulled his sword across his arm, drawing blood before he attacked. He remembered the look in the man's eyes. He hadn't understood it at the time. He understood it now. Richard hungered for the fight. The leaves of the nearby trees fluttered in the light autumn wind, glimmering with their first touches of gold and red. Winter was coming. The first day of winter would soon be here. He thought about how he would get them across the boundary. They had to get one of the boxes of Orden, and when they found it, they would find Rawl. Zed, no more games. I am Seeker now. No more tests. True? True as toasted toes. Then we are wasting our time. I am sure Rawl is not wasting his. He turned to Kaelin. I hold you to your pledge to be my guide when we reach the Midlands. She smiled at his impatience and nodded. Richard turned to Zed. Show me how the magic works, wizard. Chapter 10. Zed's impish smile spread across his face. He handed Richard the baldric. The finely tooled leather was old and supple. The gold and silver buckle matched the scabbard. It was adjusted too small, its last user having been smaller than Richard. Zed helped readjust it, as Richard strapped it across his right shoulder and fit the sword of truth to it. Zed led them to the edge of the grass amid long shadows stretching from the nearby trees to where two small rock maples grew, one as thick as Richard's wrist, the other as thin as Kaelin's. He turned to Richard. Draw the sword. The unique, ringing, metallic sound filled the late afternoon air as the sword came free. Zed leaned closer. Now, I will show you the most important thing about the sword. But to do so, I need you to briefly abdicate your post as Seeker and allow me to name Kaelin Seeker. Kaelin gave Zed a suspicious glare. I don't want to be Seeker. Just for the purpose of demonstration, dear one. He motioned for Richard to give her the sword. She hesitated before taking it in both hands. The weight was uncomfortable, and she allowed the point to lower until it rested on the grassy ground. Zed waved his hands over her head with a flourish. Kaelin Amnail, I name you Seeker. She continued to give him the same suspicious stare. Zed put his finger under her chin, tilting her head up. His eyes had a fierce intensity. He put his face voice. When I left the Midlands with this sword, Darken Rawl used his magic to place the larger of these two trees here to mark me, to be able to come for me at a time of his choosing so he could kill me. The same Darken Rawl who had Denis killed. Her countenance became darker. The same Darken Rawl who hunts you to kill you like he killed your sister. Hate flared in her eyes. Her teeth clenched, making the muscles in her strong jawline stand out. The sword of truth rose from the ground. Zed stepped behind her. This tree is his. You must stop him. The blade flashed through the autumn air with speed and power Richard could scarcely believe. The arc of its sweep went through the larger tree with a loud crack, like 1,000 twigs snapping at once. Splinters flew everywhere. The tree seemed to hang in the air a moment, then dropped down next to the ragged stump before toppling over with a crash. Richard knew it would have taken him at least 10 blows with a good axe to have felled the maple. Zed slipped the sword from Kaelin's hands as she sank to her knees and rocked back on her heels, putting her hands over her face with a moan. Instantly, Richard crouched at her side, steadying her. Kaelin, what's wrong? I'm all right. She laid a hand on his shoulder as he helped her to her feet. Her face was pale as she forced a small smile. But I resigned my post as seeker. Richard spun to the wizard. Zed, what is this nonsense? Dark and Rawl didn't put that tree there. I've seen you water and care for those two trees. If you held a knife to my throat, I'd say you planted them there as a memorial to your wife and daughter. Zed gave only a small smile. Very good, Richard. Here is your sword. You are seeker again. Now, my boy, you cut down the little tree, and then I will explain. Annoyed, Richard took the sword in both hands, feeling the anger surge through him. He gave a mighty swing at the remaining tree. The tip of the blade whistled as it sliced through the air. Just before the blade hit the tree, it simply stopped, as if the very air about it had become too thick to allow it to pass. Richard stepped back in surprise. He looked at the sword and then tried again. Same thing. The tree was untouched. He glared over at Zed, who stood with his arms folded and a smirk on his face. Richard slid the sword back into his scabbard. All right, what's going on? Zed lifted his eyebrows with an innocent expression. Did you see how easily Kalen cut through the bigger tree? Richard frowned. Zed smiled. It could just as well have been iron. The blade would have cut through it the same. But you are stronger than she, and you couldn't even scratch the smaller tree. Yes, Zed, I noticed. Zed's brow wrinkled in mock bewilderment. And why do you think that is? Richard's irritation melted. This was the way Zed often taught lessons, by making him come up with the answer on his own. I would say it has something to do with intent. She thought the tree was evil, I didn't. Zed held up a bony finger. Very good, my boy. Kalen knitted her fingers together. Zed, I don't understand. I destroyed the tree, but it wasn't evil. It was innocent. That, dear one, is the point of the demonstration. Reality isn't relevant. Perception is everything. If you think it is the enemy, you can destroy it, whether true or not. The magic interprets only your perception. It won't allow you to harm someone you think innocent, but it will destroy whoever you perceive to be the enemy, within limits. Only what you believe and not the truth of your thoughts is the determining factor. Richard was a little overwhelmed. That leaves no room for error. But what if you aren't sure? Zed lifted an eyebrow. You had better be sure, my boy, or you are liable to find yourself in a lot of trouble. The magic could read things in your mind you are not even aware of. It could go either way. You could kill a friend or fail to kill a foe. Richard drummed his fingers on the hilt of the sword, thinking. He watched the setting sun offer small golden flashes through the trees to the west. Overhead, the snake-like cloud had taken on a reddish cast on one side, deepening into darker purple on the other. It didn't really matter, he decided. He knew who he was after, and there was no doubt at all in his mind about him being the enemy. None whatsoever. There's one more thing. One more important thing, the wizard said. When you use the sword against an enemy, there is a price to pay. Is that not true, dear one? He looked to her. Kalen nodded and lowered her eyes to the ground. The more powerful the enemy, the higher the price. I am sorry it was necessary to do that to you, Kalen, but it is the most important lesson Richard must learn. She gave him a small smile, letting him know that she understood the need. He turned back to Richard. We both know that sometimes killing is the only choice, that it has to be classified as the right thing to do. I know you do not need to be told that. Any time you kill, though, it is a terrible thing. You live with it always, and once done, it cannot be undone. You pay a price within yourself. It diminishes you for having done it. Richard nodded. It still made him uneasy that he had killed the man on Blunt Cliff. He wasn't sorry about what he had done. He had had no time or other choice, but in his mind he still saw the man's face as he went over the edge. Zed's eyes became intense. It is different when you kill with the sword of truth because of the magic. The magic has done your bidding, and it extracts a price. There is no such thing as pure good or pure evil, least of all in people. In the best of us, there are thoughts or deeds that are wicked, and in the worst of us, at least some virtue. An adversary is not one who does loathsome acts for their own sake. He always has a reason that to him is justification. My cat eats mice. Does that make him bad? I don't think so, and the cat doesn't think so, but I would bet the mice have a different opinion. Every murderer thinks the victim needed killing. I know you don't want to believe this, Richard, but you must listen. Darken Rahl does the things he does because he thinks them right, just as you do the things you do because you think them right. The two of you are more the same in that than you think. You want revenge on him for killing your father, and he wants revenge on me for killing his. In your eyes, he is evil, but to his eyes, you are the one who is evil. It is all just perception. Whoever wins thinks he was in the right. The loser will always believe himself wronged. It is the same as with the magic of Orden. The power is simply there. One use wins over the other. The same? Have you lost your mind? How could you think we are the same in any way? He craves power. He would chance destroying the world to get it. I don't want power. I just wanted to be left alone. He murdered my father. He ripped his guts out. He's trying to kill us all. How can you say we are alike? You make it sound like he isn't even dangerous. Haven't you been paying attention to what I had just been teaching you? I said you are the same in that you both think you are right. And that makes him more dangerous than you can imagine. Because in every other way, you are different. Darken Rahl savors bleeding the life from people. He hungers for their pain. Your sense of right has bounds. His has none. His is twisted into an all-consuming lust to torture all opposition into submission. And he considers any who don't rush to bow before him as opposition. His conscience was clear when he used his bare hands to calmly extract your father's guts while he was still breathing. He found pleasure in the doing because his distorted sense of right gives him license. That is how he is very different from you. That is how dangerous he is. He pointed back at Kaylin. Weren't you paying attention? Didn't you see what she was able to do with the sword? And how did she do what you could not? Perception, Richard said in a much quieter voice. She was able to do it because she thought she was right. Zed thrust a finger in the air. Aha! Perception is what makes the threat even more dangerous. The wizard's finger came down and jabbed Richard's chest with each word. Just like the sword. Richard hooked a thumb under the baldric and let out a deep breath. He felt as if he were standing in quicksand, but he had lived with Zed too long to dismiss the things he said simply because they were hard to fathom. He longed for simplicity, though. You mean that it's not only what he does that makes him dangerous, but also what he feels justified in doing? Zed shrugged. Let me put it another way. Who would you be more afraid of? A 200-pound man who wants to steal a loaf of bread from you and knows he is doing wrong? Or a 100-pound woman who believes wrongly but believes with all her heart that you stole her baby? Richard folded his arms across his chest. I would run from a woman. She wouldn't give up. She wouldn't listen to reason. She would be capable of anything. Zed's eyes were fierce. So is Darken Rahl. Because he thinks he is right. He is that much more dangerous. Richard returned the fierce expression. I am in the right. Zed's expression softened. The mice think they are in the right too, but my cat eats them just the same. I am trying to teach you something, Richard. I don't want you to get caught in his claws. Richard unfolded his arms and sighed. I don't like it, but I understand. As I have heard you say, nothing is ever easy. While all of this is interesting, it isn't going to frighten me away from doing what it is I must, what I believe to be right. So what is this business about a price to using the sword of truth? Zed held a thin finger to Richard's chest. The payment is that you suffer the pain of seeing in yourself all your own evil, all your own shortcomings, all the things we don't like to see in ourselves or admit are there. And you see the good in the one you have killed, suffer the guilt for having done so. Zed shook his head sadly. Please believe me, Richard, the pain comes not only from yourself, but more importantly from the magic, a very powerful magic, a very powerful pain. Do not underestimate it. It is real, and it punishes your body as well as your soul. You saw it in Kalen, and that was from killing a tree. If it had been a man, it would have been profound. This is why anger is so important. Rage is the only armor you have against the pain. It gives a measure of protection. The stronger the enemy, the stronger the pain. But the stronger the rage, the stronger the shield. It makes you care less about the truth of what you have done. In some cases, enough to not feel the pain. This is why I said the terrible things I did to Kaylin, things that hurt and filled her with rage. It was to protect her when she used the sword. You see why I wouldn't have allowed you to take the sword if you weren't able to use your anger. You would be naked before the magic. It would tear you apart. Richard was a little frightened by this, by the look in Kaylin's eyes after she had used the sword, but it didn't dissuade him. He glanced up at the mountains of the boundary. They stood out, pale pink in the light of the setting sun.
Okay, we have this ready to be stitched up now. Yay! So this was a full roll, and I used probably about half of it for this. Say that might be about half, maybe a little bit more than half for this. All right, so now we measure a little bit. We have our cards. This is one of my bigger deck of cards that I fit in here. And we're going to fit it in here like so. Okay. And then we're going to go over, and then we're going to pin where I need to sew up to, which will be about right there. And that'll be a big enough pocket for that. And then these, like I said before, will go out. Like so. 2 and 3. Boom. Perfect. Fucking perfect. It's lovely, lovely, lovely. Okay, so we've marked that. And now we slip stitch this together at the ends. Right here. Fuck yeah.
Behind them, from the east, darkness was coming. Darkness coming for them. He had to find a way across the boundary into that darkness. The sword would help him. That was what mattered. There was much at stake. There was a cost to everything in life. He would pay this one. His old friend placed his hands on Richard's shoulders and looked hard into his eyes. Zed's features were set in grim warning. Now, I have to tell you something you are not going to like. His fingers tightened almost painfully. You cannot use the sword of truth on Dark and Rahl. What? Zed gave him a shake. He is too powerful. The magic of Odin protects him during his year of search. If you try to use the sword, you will be dead before it reaches him. This is crazy. First you want me to be the seeker and take the sword. Now you... tell me I will be dead before it reaches him. This is crazy. First you want me to be the seeker and take the sword. Now you tell me I can't use it. Richard was furious. He felt cheated. Just against Rahl. It won't work against him. Richard, I didn't make the magic. I only know how it works. Darken Rahl knows how it works too. He may try to make you use the sword against him. He knows it will kill you. If you give in to the rage and use the sword against him, he will win. You will be dead and he will have the boxes. Kalen's brow wrinkled in frustration. Zed, I agree with Richard. This makes it impossible. If he cannot use his most important weapon, then... Zed cut her off. No! This! He rapped Richard on the head with his knuckles. This is a seeker's most important weapon. He jabbed his long finger at the center of Richard's chest. And this. Everyone stood in silence for a moment. The seeker is the weapon, Zed said with emphasis. The sword is just a tool. You can find another way. You must. Richard thought he should be upset, that he should feel angry, frustrated, overwhelmed, but he didn't. His first view of his options lifted from him, letting him see beyond. He felt strangely calm and determined. I'm sorry, my boy. I wish I could change the magic, but Richard put his hand on Zed's shoulder. It's all right, my friend. You're right. We must stop Rahl. That's all that matters. I have to know the truth to succeed, and you have given me the truth. Now it's up to me to use it. If we gain one of the boxes, justice will have Rahl. I don't need to see it. I need only know it is done. I said I wouldn't be an assassin, and so I shall not be. The sword will be invaluable, I'm sure, but as you said, it's only a tool, and that's the purpose I will put it to. The magic of the sword isn't an end in itself. I can't allow myself to make that mistake, or I will be only a pretend seeker. In the gathering gloom, Zed patted Richard affectionately on the shoulder. You have gotten it all right, my boy. All of it. He broke into a broad grin. I have chosen the seeker well. I am proud of myself. Richard and Kalen laughed at Zed's self-congratulation. Kalen's smile faded. Zed, I cut down the tree you planted in memory of your wife. That bothers me. I'm deeply sorry for doing it. Don't be, dear one. Her memory has aided us. She has helped show the seeker the truth. There could be no more fitting tribute to her. Richard didn't hear them talking. Already he was looking to the east, to the massive wall of mountains, trying to think of solutions. Cross the boundary, he thought. Cross the boundary without going through it. How? What if it was impossible? What if there was no way across the boundary? Would they be stuck here while Dark and Rahl searched for the boxes? Were they to die without a chance? He wished there were more time and fewer limitations. Richard reprimanded himself for wasting time wishing. If only he knew it could be done, then he could find out how. Something in the back of his mind nagged at him, insisting that it could be done, insisting he knew the truth of it. There was a way, there had to be. If he only knew that it was possible. All around them, the night was coming alive with sounds. Frogs called from the ponds and streams, night birds from the trees, and insects from the grass. From the distant hills came the cry of wolves, mournful and plaintive against the dark wall of mountains. Somehow they had to cross those mountains, cross the unknown. The mountains were like the boundary, he thought. You couldn't go through them, but you could cross them. You had only to find a pass. A pass. Was it possible? Could there be one? Then it struck him like a bolt of lightning. The book. Richard spun on his heels, excited. To his surprise, Zed and Kaylin were both standing quietly, watching him, as if waiting for a pronouncement. Zed, have you ever helped anyone other than yourself go through the boundary? Like who? Anyone, yes or no? No, no one. Can anyone other than a wizard send a person through the boundary? Zed shook his head emphatically. None but a wizard, and Dark and Rahl, of course. Richard frowned at him. Our lives depend on this, Zed. Swear. You have never, ever sent anyone other than yourself through the boundary. True? True as a boiling bog full of toasted toads. Why? What have you thought of? Do you have a way? Richard ignored the question, too deep in his own stream of thought to answer, and instead turned back to the mountains. It was true. There was a pass across the boundary. His father had found it and used it. That was the only way the Book of Counted Shadows could have been in Westland. He couldn't have brought it with him when he moved here, before the boundary, and he couldn't have found it in Westland. The book had magic. The boundary wouldn't have worked if magic had been here then. Magic could only be brought into Westland after the boundary was up. His father had found a pass, gone into the Midlands, and brought the book back. Richard was shocked and excited at the same time. His father had done it. He had gone across the boundary. Richard was elated. Now he knew there was a way across. It could be done. He still had to find the pass. But that didn't matter for now. There was a pass. That was what mattered. Richard turned back to the other two. We will go have supper. I put a stew on just before you awoke, and there is fresh bread, Kaylin offered. Bags! Zed threw his scarecrow arms up into the air. It's about time someone remembered supper. Richard gave a little smile in the dark. After we've eaten, we'll make preparations, decide what we need to take, what we can carry, get our provisions together, and pack tonight. We'll need to get a good night's sleep. We leave at first light. He turned and headed for the house. The faint glow of the fire coming from the windows offered warmth and light. Zed held up an arm. Where are we headed, my boy? The Midlands, Richard called back over his shoulder. Zed was halfway through his second bowl of stew before he could bring himself to stop eating long enough to talk. So, what have you figured out? Is there truly a way to cross the boundary? There is. Are you sure? How can it be? How can we cross without going through? Richard smiled as he stirred his stew. You don't have to get wet to cross a river. The lamplight flickered on their faces as Kaylin and Zed frowned in puzzlement. Kaylin turned and threw a small piece of meat to the cat who was sitting on his haunches, waiting for any handout. Zed ate another slab of bread before he was able to ask his next question. And how do you know there is a way across? There is. That's all that matters. Zed had an innocent look on his face. Richard. He ate 2 more spoonfuls of stew. We are your friends. There are no secrets among us. You can tell us. Richard looked from one big pair of eyes to the other and laughed out loud. I've had strangers tell me more of themselves. Zed and Kaylin both backed away a little at the rebuff and looked at each other, but neither dared repeat the question. They talked on as they ate, of what they had at hand to take with them, how much they could do to prepare in such a short time, and what their priorities should be. They listed everything they could think of, each offering items to be taken. There was much to do in little time. Richard asked Kaylin if she traveled the Midlands often. She said that was almost all she ever did. And you wear that dress when you travel? I do. She hesitated. People recognize me by it. I don't stay in the woods. Wherever I go, I am always provided with food and a place to stay and anything else I might require. Richard wondered why. He didn't press, but he knew the dress she wore was more than something she bought in a shop. Well, with the 3 of us being hunted, I don't think we want people to recognize you. I think we need to stay away from people as much as possible. keep to the woods when we can. She and Zed both nodded their agreement. We will need to find you some traveling clothes, forest garb, but there is nothing here that will fit you. We'll have to find something on the way. I have a hooded cloak here. It will keep you warm for now. Good, she said, smiling. I am tired of being cold, and I can tell you a dress is not right for the woods. Kaylin finished before the men and put her half-full bowl on the floor for the cat. The cat seemed to have the same appetite as Zed and was eating out of the bowl before she could set it down. They discussed each item they would take and planned how they would do without the others. There was no telling how long they would be gone, but Westland was a big place and the Midlands bigger. Richard wished they could go to his house, since he often went on long treks and had the right kinds of provisions, but it was too big a risk. He would rather find the things they needed elsewhere, or go without, than go back to what waited there. He didn't know yet where they were going to cross the boundary, but he wasn't worried. He still had until morning to think about it. He was just relieved to know there was a way. The cat's head came up. He crossed half the distance to the door and stopped, back and fur rising. Everyone noticed and fell silent. There was firelight in the front window, but it wasn't reflecting from the hearth. It was coming from outside. I smell burning pitch, Kaylin said. In an instant, the three were on their feet. Richard grabbed the sword from the back of his chair and had it on almost before he was to his feet. He went to look out the window, but Zed didn't waste the time and went through the door in a rush with Kaylin in tow. Richard got only a glimpse of torches before he hurried out after the other two. Spread out in the long grass in front of the house was a mob of about 50 men, some carrying torches, but most carrying crude weapons, axes, pitchforks, scythes, or axe handles. They were dressed in their work clothes. Richard recognized many of the faces, good men, honest, hard-working family men. They didn't look like good men this night, though. They looked to be in a foul mood, their faces grim and angry. Zed stood in the center of the porch, hands on his skinny hips, smiling out at them, the red light from the torches making his white hair pink. "What's this then, boys?" Zed asked. They mumbled among themselves, and several men in front took a step or two forward. Richard knew the one, John, who spoke for the rest. "There's trouble about. Trouble caused by magic, and you're at the bottom of it, old man. You're a witch." "A witch?" Zed asked in bewilderment. "A witch?" "That's what I said, a witch." John's dark eyes shifted to Richard and Kaylin. "This doesn't concern you two. Our business is with the old man. Leave now or you'll get the same as him." Richard couldn't believe the men he knew were saying this. Kaylin came forward, stepping in front of Zed, the folds of her dress swirling around her legs when she stopped. She held her fists at her sides. "Leave now," she warned menacingly, "before you come to regret what you have chosen to do." The mob of men looked around at each other, some smirking, some making crude comments under their breath, some laughing. Kaylin stood her ground and stared them down. The laughter died out. "So," John said with a sneer, "two witches to take care of." The men cheered and hollered, brandishing their weapons. John's round, heavy-set face smiled defiantly. Richard stepped slowly and deliberately in front of Kaylin, putting a hand behind as he did so, forcing her and Zed to step back. He kept his voice calm, friendly. "John, how's Sarah? I haven't seen you two for a while." John didn't answer. Richard surveyed the other faces. "I know many of you. Know you to be good men. This isn't something you want to do." He looked back to John. "Take your men and go home to your families. Please, John?" John pointed an axe handle at Zed. "That old man's a witch. We're going to put an end to him." He pointed at Kaylin. "And her. Unless you want the same, Richard, be on your way." The mob yelled their agreement. The torches sizzled and popped as they burned, and the air smelled of burning pitch and sweat. When they realized that Richard wasn't leaving, the rabble started to push forward. The sword was free in a blink. The men took a step back as the metallic ringing filled the night air. John stood in red-faced anger. The ringing died out, and the only sound was from the burning torches. Grumbling broke out about Richard being in with the witches. John charged, swinging the axe handle at Richard as he came. The sword flashed through the air, splintering John's weapon with a loud crack. Only 2 ragged inches of the axe handle were left above his fist. The severed piece of wood spun off into the darkness, landing somewhere with a hollow thud. John stood frozen, 1 foot on the ground, 1 on the porch, and the point of the sword of truth pressed to the underside of his ample chin. The polished blade glinted in the torchlight. Richard, his muscles hard with restrained need, slowly bent forward, and with the sword point tilted John's face up to his own. In a voice barely more than a whisper, but so deadly cold it made John stop breathing, he said, "Another step, John, and your head follows." John didn't move, didn't breathe. "Back away," Richard hissed. The man did as he was ordered, but when back with his fellows, regained his nerve. "You can't stop us, Richard. We're here to save our families." "From what?" Richard yelled. He pointed the sword at one of the other men. "Frank, when your wife was sick, wasn't it Zed who brought her a potion that made her well?" He pointed the sword to another. "And Bill, didn't you come and ask Zed about the rains, when they would come so you fellows could harvest your crops?" He whipped the sword's point back to his attacker. "And John, when your little girl was lost in the woods, was it not Zed who read the clouds all night and then went out himself and found her and brought her back safe to you and Sarah?" John and a few of the others cast their eyes downward. Richard angrily drove the sword back into its scabbard. "Zed has helped most of the men here. He has helped heal your fevers, find lost loved ones, and freely shared anything he has with you." From the back, someone yelled out, "Only a witch could do all those things." "He has done nothing to harm a single one of you." Richard paced back and forth across the porch, facing the men down. "He has never harmed one of you. He's helped most of you. Why would you want to harm a friend?" There was some confused grumbling for a few minutes before they regained their conviction. "Most of the things he's done are magic," John shouted. "A witch's magic. None of our families are safe with him around." Before Richard could answer, Zed was pulling him back by his arm. He turned to the old man's smiling face. Zed didn't seem to be bothered in the least. If anything, he seemed to be enjoying himself. "Very impressive," he whispered. "Both of you, very impressive. If you would, though, let me handle it from here." He lifted an eyebrow, then turned to the men. "Gentlemen, good evening. How nice to see you all." Some of the men gave a greeting in return. A few lifted their hats self-consciously. "If you would be so kind, before you dispatch me, let me talk a moment with my 2 friends here." There were nods all around. Zed pulled Kaylin and Richard back a little toward the house, away from the crowd, and bent close. "A lesson in power, my friends." He put a stick-like finger on Kaylin's nose. "Too little." Next, he put the finger on Richard's nose. "Too much." He put the finger to his own nose and with a twinkle in his eyes said, "Just right." He cupped Kaylin's chin in his hand. "If I were to let you do this, dear one, there would be graves to be dug this night. Our 3 would be among them. But very noble nonetheless. Thank you for your concern for me." He put his hand on Richard's shoulder. "If I were to let you do this, there would be a great many graves to be dug, and the 3 of us would be the only ones left to do the digging. I am too old to dig that many holes in the ground, and we have more important things to do. But you were very noble, too. You handled yourself honorably." He patted Richard's shoulder, and then put a finger under each of their chins. "Now, I want you 2 to let me handle this matter. The problem is not what you are telling these men. The problem is they aren't listening. You have to get their attention before they will hear you." He lifted an eyebrow and looked to each in turn. Watch and learn what you can. Listen to my words, but they will have no effect on you. He removed his finger and shuffled past them, smiling and waving to the men. Gentlemen! Oh, John, how is your little girl? She's fine, he grumbled. But one of my cows had a two-headed calf. Really? And how do you think that happened? I think it happened because you're a witch. There, you said it again. Zed shook his head in confusion. I don't understand. Do you gentlemen want to do away with me because you think I have magic? Or is it simply your intention to demean me by calling me a woman? There was some confusion. We don't know what you're talking about, someone said. Well, it's simple. Girls are witches. Boys are called warlocks. Do you see my point? If you call me a witch, you seem to be calling me a girl. If what you mean is that you think me a warlock, well, that is an altogether different insult. So which is it, girl or warlock? There was more confused discussion. Then John spoke up angry. We mean to say you're a warlock and we intend to have your hide for it. My, Zed said, tapping his lower lip thoughtfully with the tip of his finger. Why, I had no idea you men were so brave. So very brave indeed. How's that? John asked. Zed shrugged. Well, what is it you think a warlock capable of? There was more talk among themselves. They started shouting out suggestions. He could make two-headed cows, make the rains come, find people who were lost, make children be stillborn, make strong men weak, and make their women leave them. Somehow this didn't seem to be sufficient, so more ideas were shouted out. Make water burn, turn people into cripples, change a man into a toad, kill with a look, call upon demons, and in general everything else. Zed waited until they were done, and then held his arms out to them. There, you have it. Just as I said. You men are the bravest fellows I have ever seen. To think, armed only with pitchforks and axe handles, you came to do battle with a warlock who has these kinds of powers. My, how brave. His voice trailed off. Zed shook his head in wonderment. Worry started to break out of the crowd. Zed went on in a drawn-out, monotonous tone, suggesting the things a warlock could do, describing in great detail a variety of deeds from the frivolous to the terrifying. The men stood, transfixed, listening in rapt attention. He went on for a good half hour. Richard and Kaylin listened, shifting their weight as they became bored and tired. The eyes of the mob were wide, unblinking. They stood like statues, the dancing flames from their torches the only motion among the men. The mood had changed. There was no longer anger, now there was fear. The wizard's voice changed too, no longer kind and gentle or even dull. It was hard, threatening. And so, men, what do you think it is we should do now? We think you should let us go home unharmed, came the weak reply. The others nodded their agreement. The wizard waggled a long finger in the air in front of them. No, I don't think so. You see, you men came here to kill me. My life is the most precious thing I have, and you intended to take it from me. I can't let that go unpunished. Quaking in fear swept through the crowd. Zed stepped to the edge of the porch. The men took a step back. As punishment for trying to take my life, I take from you not your life, but that which is most precious, most dear, most valuable. With a flourish, he swept his hand dramatically over their heads. They gasped. There! It is done, he declared. Richard and Kaylin, who had been leaning against the house, stood up straight. For a moment, no one moved. Then a fellow in the midst of the mob thrust his hand into his pocket and felt around. My gold, it's gone! Zed rolled his eyes. No. I said the most precious, the most dear, that which you pride above all else. Everyone stood a moment, confused. Then a few eyebrows went up in alarm. Another man suddenly thrust his hand into his pocket and felt around, eyes wide in fright. He moaned and then fainted. The ones nearby drew back from him. Soon others were putting their hands in their pockets, cautiously feeling around. There were more moans and wails, and soon all the men were grabbing at their crotches in a panic. Zed smiled in satisfaction. Pandemonium broke out among the mob. Men were jumping up and down, crying, grabbing at themselves, running around in little circles, asking for help, falling on the ground and sobbing. Now, you men get out of here! Leave! Zed yelled. He turned to Richard and Kaylin. An impish grin on his face wrinkled his nose. He winked at them both. Please, Zed, a few men called out. Please don't leave us like this. Please help us. There were pleas all around. Zed waited a few moments and turned back to them. What's this? Do you men think I have been too harsh? He asked with mock wonder and sincerity. There was quick agreement that he had been. And why do you think this? Have you learned something? Yes, John yelled. We realize now that Richard was right. You have been our friend. You have never done anything to harm any of us. Everyone shouted their agreement. You have only helped us, and we acted stupidly. We want to ask your forgiveness. We know, just like Richard said, that we were wrong, that using magic doesn't make you bad. Please, Zed, don't stop being our friend now. Please don't leave us like this. There were more pleas shouted out. Zed tapped a finger on his bottom lip. Well, he looked up thinking. I guess I could put things back to the way they were. The men moved closer. But only if you agree to my terms. I think them quite fair, though. They were ready to agree to anything. All right. Then if you agree to tell anyone who speaks up from now on that magic doesn't make a person bad, that their actions are what count, and if you go home to your families and tell them you almost made a terrible mistake tonight and why you were wrong, then you will all be restored. Fair? There was nodding from everyone. More than fair, John said. Thank you, Zed. The men turned and began to leave quickly. Zed stood and watched. Oh, gentlemen, one more thing. They froze. Please pick up your tools from the ground. I'm an old man. I could easily trip and hurt myself. They kept a cautious eye to him as they reached out and snatched up their weapons. They turned and walked a ways before breaking into a run. Richard came and waited to one side of Zed, Kaylin to the other. Zed stood with his hands on his bony hips, watching the men go. Idiots, he muttered under his breath. It was dark. The only light came from the front window of the house behind them, and Richard could barely see Zed's face, but he could see it well enough to see he wasn't smiling. My friends, the old man said, that was a stew stirred by a hidden hand. Zed, Kaylin asked, diverting her eyes from his face. Did you really make their manhood vanish? Zed chuckled. That would be quite the magic. Beyond me, I'm afraid. No, dear one, I only tricked them into thinking I had. Simply convinced them of the truth of it. Let their own minds do the work. Richard turned to the wizard. A trick? It was just a trick? I thought you had done real magic. He seemed somehow disappointed. Zed shrugged. Sometimes, if a trick is done properly, it can work better than magic. In fact, I would go so far as to say a good trick is real magic. But still, it was just a trick. The wizard held up a finger. Results, Richard, that's what counts. Your way, those men would have all lost their heads. Richard grinned. Zed, I think some of them would have preferred that over what you did to them. Zed chuckled. So, is that what you wanted us to watch and learn? That a trick can work as well as magic? Yes, but also something more important. As I said, This was a stew stirred by a hidden hand, the hand of Dark and Raoul. But he has made a mistake tonight. It is a mistake to use insufficient force to finish the job. In so doing, you give your enemy a second chance. That is the lesson I want you to learn. Learn it well. You may not get a second chance when your time comes. Richard frowned. I wonder why he did it then. Zed shrugged. I don't know. Maybe because he doesn't have enough power in this land yet. But then, it also was a mistake to try, because it only served to warn us. They started toward the door. There was a lot of work to do before they could sleep. Richard began going through the list in his head, but was distracted by an odd feeling. Suddenly, realization washed over him like cold water. Richard inhaled in a gasp. He spun around, eyes wide, and grabbed a fistful of Zed's robes. We have to get out of here, right now. What? Zed. Dark and Raoul isn't stupid. He wants us to feel safe, to feel confident. He knew we were smart enough to beat those men one way or another. In fact, he wanted us to. So we would sit around congratulating ourselves while he comes for us himself. He doesn't fear you. You said he's stronger than a wizard. He doesn't fear the sword, and he doesn't fear Kaelin. He's on his way here right now. His plan is to get us all at the same time right now, this very night. He hasn't made a mistake. This was his plan. You said it yourself. Sometimes a trick is better than magic. That's what he's doing. This was all a trick to distract us. Kaelin's face went white. Zed, Richard is right. This is how Raoul thinks. The mark of his way. He likes to do things in a manner you do not expect. We have to get out of here this very minute. Bags, I have been an old fool. You are right. We must leave now, but I can't leave without my rock. He started off around the house. Zed, there's no time. The old man was already running up the hill, robes and hair flying off into the darkness. Kaelin followed Richard into the house. They had been lulled into laziness. He couldn't believe how foolish he had been to underestimate Raoul. Snatching up his pack from the corner by the hearth, he ran into his room, checking under his shirt to the tooth. Finding it safe, he came back with his forest cloak. Richard threw it around Kaelin's shoulders and took a quick glance around to see if there was anything else he could grab. But there was no time to think, nothing worth their lives, so he took her by the arm and headed for the door. Outside in the grass in front of the house, Zed was already back, breathing hard. What about the rock? Richard asked. There was no way Zed could lift it, much less carry it. In my pocket, the wizard said with a smile. Richard couldn't spare the time to wonder at this. The cat was suddenly there, somehow aware of their urgency, rubbing up against their legs. Zed picked it up. Can't leave you here, cat. There's trouble coming. Zed lifted the flap of Richard's pack and tucked the cat inside. Richard had an uneasy feeling.
222.
He looked about, scanning the darkness, seeking something out of place, something hidden. He saw nothing, but felt eyes watching. Kaelin noticed his searching. What's wrong? Even though he could see nothing, he felt the eyes. It must be his fear, he decided. Nothing. Let's go. Richard led them through a sparsely wooded area he knew well enough to walk blindfolded to the trail he wanted and turned south. They moved along quickly in silence, with the exception of Zed muttering occasionally about how stupid he had been. After a while, Kaelin told him he was too reproachful of himself. They had all been fooled, and each felt the sting of blame. But they had made good their escape, and that was all that mattered. It was an easy trail, almost a road, and the company of three walked side by side, Richard in the middle, Zed to his left, Kaelin to his right. The cat poked his head up from Richard's backpack and looked about as they walked. It was a mode of travel he had enjoyed since he was a kitten. The moonlight was enough to light their way. Richard saw a few wayward pines looming against the sky, but he knew there could be no stopping. They had to get away from here. The night was cold, but he was warm enough with the effort of their rapid pace. Kaelin wrapped his cloak tightly around herself. After about a half hour, Zed brought them to a halt. He reached into his robes and pulled out a small handful of powder. He threw it back down the path the way they had come. Silver sparkles shot from his hand and followed their trail back into the darkness. The sparkles tinkled as they went, disappearing around a bend. Richard started back up the trail. What was that? Just a little magic dust. It will cover our trail so Rawl won't know where we went. He still has the cloud to follow us with. Yes, but that will only give him a general area. If we keep moving, it will be of little use to him. It's only when you stop, like you did in my house, that he can hunt you. They continued on to the south, the trail taking them through sweet-smelling pines and higher into the hill country. At the top of a rise, they all turned suddenly at a roaring sound behind. Off beyond the dark expanse of the forest, in the distance, they saw an immense column of flame shooting skyward, yellows and reds reaching up into the blackness. It's my house. Doc and Rawl is there, Zed smiled. He looks to be angry. Kalen touched his shoulder. I'm sorry, Zed. Don't be, dear one. It's just an old house. It could have been us. Kalen turned to Richard as they started out again. Do you know where we are going? Richard abruptly realized he did. I do. He smiled to himself, glad to be telling the truth. The three figures fled into the dark shadows of the trail into the night. Overhead, two huge winged beasts watched with hungry, glowing green eyes, and then pitched themselves into steep, silent dives. Wings tucked back for speed, they plummeted toward the backs of their prey. Chapter 11. It was the cat that saved him. He yowled and leapt over Richard's head in a fright, causing him to duck. Not enough for the guard to miss him, but enough to deflect the full impact. Still, the claws raked his back painfully and knocked him sprawling face down into the dirt, driving the wind from his lungs in a whoosh. Before he could take a breath, the gar pounced on his back, its weight preventing him from breathing or reaching his sword. Before he went down, he had seen Zed sent tumbling into the trees by a second gar, and now it went crashing through the brush after him. Richard braced himself for the claws he knew would come. Before the gar could rip him open, Kalen heaved rocks at it from the side of the path. They bounced harmlessly off the beast's head, but it was distracted momentarily. The gar roared, mouth agape, seeming to split the night air with the sound, and held him pinned like a mouse beneath the cat's paw. Richard struggled mightily to lift himself, his lungs burning for air. Blood flies bit his neck. He reached behind, pulling out handfuls of fur, trying to get the great arm off his back. By its size, he knew it had to be a short-tailed gar. It was much bigger than the long-tailed gar he had seen before. The sword was under him, digging painfully into his abdomen. He couldn't get to it. He felt as if the veins in his neck would burst. Richard was beginning to black out. The sounds of yelling and roars from the gar were growing fainter as he struggled. Kalen got too close in her flurry of rock throwing. The gar reached out with frightening quickness and snatched her by the hair. Doing so caused the beast to shift his weight enough to let Richard gasp desperately for air, but not enough to allow him to move. Kalen screamed. Out of nowhere, the cat, all teeth and claws, sprang to the gar's face. The cat howled, clawing furiously at the gar's eyes. With one arm holding Kalen, it lifted the other to swipe at the cat. When it did, Richard rolled to the side and sprang to his feet, drawing his sword. Kalen screamed again. Richard swung in fury, severing the arm that held her. She tumbled back, free. Howling, the gar backhanding him before he could bring the sword up. The force of the blow sent him flying through the air, landing on his back. Richard sat up, the world spinning and tilting. The sword was gone, thrown into the brush somewhere. The gar was in the center of the trail, wailing in pain and rage as blood gushed from the stump. Glowing green eyes searched frantically for the object of its hate. They locked on Richard. He didn't see Kalen anywhere. Off to his right, in the trees, there was a sudden blinding flash, illuminating everything with intense white light. The violent sound of an explosion hammered painfully into his ears as the concussion from the blast tumbled him against a tree and knocked the gar from its feet. Rolling flames whirled through gaps in the trees. Giant splinters and other debris hurtled past, streaming trailers of smoke. Richard began a frantic search for the sword as the Gar came to its feet with a howl. Richard felt around on the ground, desperate, and partially blinded from the flash of the explosion. He had enough vision, though, to see the Gar coming. His anger flared. He could feel it flare in the sword, too. The sword's magic reached out to him, beckoned by its master. He called it forth, summoned it, hungered for it. It was there across the trail. He knew it as surely as if he could see it. He knew exactly where it lay, as if he were touching it. He scrambled across the trail. Halfway there, the Gar kicked him so hard he saw things moving past but couldn't understand what they were. All he knew for sure was that every breath caused intense pain in his left side. He didn't know where the trail was or where he was in relation to it. Blood flies were bumping into his face. He couldn't get his bearings, but he did know where the Sword of Truth was. He dove for it. For an instant, his fingers touched it. For an instant, he thought he saw Zed. Then the Gar had him. It picked him up by his right arm and wrapped its repulsive warm wings around him, hugging him close.
Hi, everybody. So what I'm listening to is a book on tape called Wizard's First Rule, Sword of Truth, #1. It's on Terry Goodkind audiobook YouTube channel. And I am just getting done with a oracle card holder. I could probably go a little less on that actually next time. But I got an oracle card holder that I'm finishing up right now. Getting the little tassels done. Here's this one, and yeah. What do you think, guys? What you think? And then this is the tarot card holder that I created last night. I'll probably end up putting a little pentacle on this right here, like right here. I think little charm, so that it has a little charm as well. But this is the tarot card holder, different sizes. But yeah, it's a fun book on tape that I have, that I've been listening to. I don't remember the name. This is, here, I'll put it in here. Yeah. Let's see, actually, let me link it here. Let me do it here instead. Do you like it so far? Isn't it fun? It's a fun adventure. It's a fun adventure. All right, now I gotta go to mine. Am I live? Oh, wait a minute. Where even am I? Where even am I, man? Here it is. Let me turn it down so I'm not all crazy. Echoey. Okay. So that is the link to the actual book that I'm listening to. And on that channel, there's all kinds of different books. So this is book 1. I'm sure there's a series, and we're about halfway through this book. But yeah, I like listening to this shit. So yeah, it's like at 12. I listen to it. You can kind of see here. This one right here. It's like 12 hours long. It's the whole fucking book. We're about halfway through. But I like to listen to it when I do this. That way I don't have to worry about looking up to anything. So let's see where we're at. It's an exciting part, isn't it? Cheers, Annie. Love you, darling. Hello, everybody else who's here. Oh, you got your package. Excellent. I'll let him know. He probably just heard me. So perfect. You caught his pass. You're funny. What up? How you doing, country bread? All right. Let's see. I'm almost done. I'm going to do these little tassels. Actually, you know what? I need to get a little charm on here. I'll do that later, though. Actually, I might as well do it now. Let me go get one. Let you guys listen to the book. Oops. I turned it down. I forgot I turned it down.
Alive. It hit the Gar's. in pain and dropped him, its fetid breath on his face, its black throat waiting. Wet fangs glistened in the moonlight. With all his strength, Richard kicked his boot into the stump of the Gar's arm. It threw its head back, howled in pain, and dropped him. Zed emerged at the edge of the trees a dozen yards behind the Gar. Richard, on his knees, grabbed the sword. Zed threw his hands out, fingers extended. Fire, wizard's fire, shot from his fingers and came shrieking through the air. The fire grew and tumbled, illuminating everything it passed, becoming a blue and yellow ball of liquid flame that wailed and expanded as it came, a thing alive. It hit the Gar's back with a thud, silhouetting the giant beast against the light. Within the space of a breath, the blue and yellow flames washed over the Gar, enveloping it, surging through it. Blood flies sparked into nothingness. Fire sizzled and snapped everywhere on the creature, consuming it. The Gar disappeared into the blue heat and was gone. The fire swirled a moment, and then it too was gone. The smell of burnt fur and a hazy smoke hung in the air. The night was suddenly quiet. Richard collapsed, exhausted and in pain. The gashes on his back had dirt and gravel ground into them, and the pain in his left side seared into him with every breath. He wanted only to lie there, nothing more. The sword was still in his hand. He let the power of it wash through him, sustain him. He allowed the anger of it to let him ignore the pain. The cat licked Richard's face with his rough tongue and nuzzled the top of his head against Richard's cheek. "Thank you, cat," he managed. Zed and Kaylin appeared over him. Both bent down to take his arms and help lift him up. "No, you'll hurt me if you do that. Let me get up by myself." "What's wrong?" Zed asked. "The guard kicked me in the left side. It hurts." "Let me look." The old man bent over and gently felt Richard's ribs. Richard winced in pain. "Well, I don't see any bones sticking out. Can't be that bad." Richard tried not to laugh, as he knew it would hurt. He was right. "Zed, that was no trick. This time it was magic." "This time it was magic," the wizard confirmed. "But Dark and Rawl may have seen it too if he was looking. We have to get out of here. Lie still, let me see if I can help." Kaylin knelt on his other side and cupped her hand on his, on the hand that held the sword, held the magic. When her hand touched his, he felt a surge of power from the sword that startled him and nearly took his breath away. Somehow, he felt the magic was warning him and trying to protect him. Kaylin smiled down at him. She hadn't felt it. Zed put one hand on Richard's ribs and a finger under his chin as he spoke in a soft, calm, reassuring voice. As he listened to Zed, Richard dismissed the sword's reaction to Kaylin's touch on his hand. His old friend told him that 3 of his ribs were injured and that he was putting magic around them to strengthen and protect them until they could heal. He continued to talk in his special way, telling Richard how the pain would be reduced but not gone until the ribs were healed. He spoke more, but the words seemed somehow not to matter. When Zed finished at last, Richard felt as if he were waking from sleep. He sat up. The pain had lessened greatly. He thanked the old man and got to his feet. He put the sword away and picked up the cat, thanking him again. He handed the cat to Kaylin for her to hold while he searched for his pack and found it near the side of the trail where it had been thrown in the fight. The gashes on his back were painful, but he would worry about them when they got to where they were going. When the other 2 weren't looking, he slipped the tooth from his neck and put it in his pocket. Richard asked the other 2 if they were hurt. Zed seemed insulted by the question. He insisted he wasn't as frail as he looked. Kaylin said she was fine thanks to him. Richard told her he hoped never to get in a rock-throwing contest with her. She gave him a big smile as she put Cat in his backpack. He watched as she picked up the cloak and put it around her shoulders, wondering at the way the sword's magic had reacted when she had touched his hand. "We had better be leaving," Zed reminded them. After about a mile, several smaller paths intersected theirs. Richard led them down the one he wanted. The wizard spread more of his magic dust to hide their trail. Their way was narrower now, so they walked single file, with Richard in the lead, Kaylin in the middle, and Zed in the rear. The 3 of them kept a wary eye to the sky as they walked along. Even though it was uncomfortable to do so, Richard walked with his hand on the hilt of the sword. Shadows in the moonlight swept back and forth across the heavy oak door and its iron strap hinges as the wind bowed branches close to the house. Kaylin and Zed didn't want to climb the spiked fence, so Richard had left them on the other side to wait. He was just starting to reach up to knock on the door when a big fist grabbed his hair and a knife pressed against his throat. He froze. "Chase?" he whispered hopefully. The hand released his hair. "Richard, what are you doing lurking about in the middle of the night? You know better than to sneak up to my place." "I wasn't sneaking. I didn't want to wake the whole house." "There's blood all over you. How much is yours?" "Most of it, I'm sorry to say." "Chase, go unlock your gate. Kaylin and Zed are waiting out there. We need you." Chase, cursing as he stepped on twigs and acorns with his bare feet, unlocked the gate and shepherded them all into the house. Emma Brandstone, Chase's wife, was a kind, friendly woman, always wearing a smile on her bright face. She seemed the complete opposite of Chase. Emma would be mortified if she thought she had intimidated anyone, while Chase's day wouldn't be complete unless he had. Emma was like Chase in one respect, though. Nothing ever seemed to surprise or fluster her. She was typically unruffled at this late hour as she stood in her long white nightdress, her gray-streaked hair tied back, making tea as the rest of them sat at the table. She smiled as if it were normal to have blood-streaked guests come visiting in the middle of the night. But then with Chase, it sometimes was. Richard hung his pack over the back of his chair, taking the cat out and handing him to Kaylin. She put him in her lap, where he immediately began purring as she stroked his back. Zed sat to his other side. Chase put a shirt on over his big frame and lit several lamps that hung from heavy oak beams. Chase had felled the trees, hewed the beams out, and placed them by himself. The names of the children were carved along the side of one. Behind his chair at the table was a fireplace made of stones he had collected in his travels over the years. Each had a unique shape, color, and texture. Chase would tell anyone who would listen where each had come from and what sort of trouble he had encountered in retrieving it. A simple wooden bowl full of apples sat in the center of the stout pine table. Emma removed the bowl of apples and replaced it with a pot of tea and a jar of honey.
Okay, let me get this out of my face now. I believe we have accomplished what we came here to do today. This was more than my 1 hour morning tea. This was 3 hours of finishing a WIP project. So cheers to my crocheters out there. Cheers to my friends who came by and said hi and watched me do the damn thing. So we are complete. This is an oracle card holder. It's got oracle cards in it. It's got these oracle cards in it, actually. Boop. And this is going on the website. I'm going to take pictures today. Very proud of it right now. Okay. I love it. I'm happy. Okay. Now it's break time for me. I'm going to go do something else for a little bit. Maybe play a game, because the Hubs is on the gamer Xbox and I kind of want to join them for a little bit. Time for a break. Thank you everybody for joining me today. It was a long one, but it was a fun one and I got something done. So cheers. Mwah. Catch me next time. We'll either whip it out or we'll talk it out or we'll chat it out. Chatting and talking is the same thing. Or we'll do card readings. We didn't do card readings today. Let me pull one out. Let's see what it says. Let's pull an oracle card out of this guy. Perfect setting. It's the perfect setting. I'm not going to read it. We're just going to go with it. What is around you? Is it the perfect setting for what it is you have to do today? All right. Peace out, everybody. Fabulous to see you. And I'll catch you on the flip side or on the next one. Bye.